This interview is being conducted at Colchester Police Station, Essex, on Tuesday the 14th of the 5th, 96. I am Detective Constable Norton from headquarters at Chelmsford, and the time by my watch is now 18:27. I'm here to interview Michael Steele. There's one other police officer in the room. If you could introduce yourself, please. Yes, DC Shakespeare, also from Essex Police Headquarters at Chelmsford. Michael, can you give us your full name and address and date of birth, please? Michael John Steele. It's the 13th of the 1242, and I live at Oakland's Anglers Green, Colchester. Thank you very much. And you're being represented by... I'm Christopher Bowen of Jeeps and Sons. I'm a solicitor. I'm now required to explain my role at this interview is to advise Mr. Steele throughout. I shall intervene in the interview if he requires any legal advice or assistance, or if your question is inappropriate or you make matters known at the interview which hasn't been discussed with me beforehand. I confirm that we've had several meetings before this interview takes place. I've advised Mr. Steele and he's instructed me as to taking all the advice that I've given him, and he wishes to remain silent at this interview. Now he understands that you've got to ask him questions. I ask you to respect his decision to remain silent at this interview. I'm now going to let you begin the interview. Thank you for my introduction. Okay. Right, it says we've had a number of consultations. Your solicitor seems fairly happy with what they decided to go through. You're entitled to free legal advice at any stage, Michael, all right? I understand, yes. So if you want to have a chat with him again, that's your right. Just indicate that to us. Now, you don't have to say anything unless you wish to do so, but it may harm your defence if you fail to mention when questioned something which you rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Now, you do fully understand and accept that principle. I do understand, yes. Now, there's a form that I need you to give you right that's going to be on the table during the interview, and I'll hand it to you at the end, and it explains to you your rights in relation to the tapes and how to get copies of them, that sort of thing. Okay, now, you've been in custody for a number of hours now. Yes. Right, you feel happy to be interviewed? You feel relaxed? I do, yeah. Fresh enough? Yes. Well fed and watered? Certainly, yeah. Okay. Now, there's been a number of reasons for that delay. Obviously, your solicitor's been updating with you why it's all gone on like this. It's a complicated and complex inquiry, and we are trying to expedite it as quickly as we can. Right, now, obviously, I was at the scene of your arrest yesterday in Ipswich. That will be part of this interview as to what happened there and how that went on. Now, just to remind you that you were arrested for conspiracy to import controlled drugs into this country. Now, if we can just narrow that down at the moment and just concentrate our minds on the events of the last few days, then hopefully by looking at that, then we make our decision clear to you. And as I've said, you're invited to make any comments that you wish to, and anything that you disagree with, or anything that you wish to say now is your time to say it. Just a couple of things that I'd like to ask you. You've given your address as Great Bentley. How long have you lived there? The last 3 years. Last 3 years, and that's with Jackie Street? Exactly, yeah. And now, is that a legal relationship? No, she's my common law wife. Right, okay. The responsibility for that premises, is it joint names or? It is joint names, yeah. Right, okay. And the funding for that purchase was yours alone or a joint enterprise? The funding for the property? For the purchase of it? Right. The property is mortgaged. In joint names? In joint names, yeah. Right, okay. We are also aware there's another property in which I wish to ask you about in relation to Meadow Cottage, London Road, Clacton. Is that your property? It is. Are you the sole owner? Yes. And is it again same scenario? It's mortgaged to you? It's mortgaged to me, yes. Not joint names? Not joint names, no. Okay. So you're running mortgages at the same time for both properties? One is sold, yeah. One is sold, i.e. the one at Anglers Green? Exactly. Okay, right. When did you purchase Meadow Cottage? I think just before Christmas time. Christmas just gone, 95 or, yeah, or 94, 95. So it's around that time, okay. So if you say like late December 95, I assume that's fine? Approximately, yeah. Right, okay. And what's the setup? Is that fully mortgaged 100% or? It's a mortgage, yeah. Right. Did you lay any money down for the deposit or? No comment. Right. I'm just looking at it, owning two properties at the same time. Both to me look quite substantial properties to get mortgages and deposits, that sort of thing. Just inquiring as to how you purchased Meadow Cottage. How you, I understand, yes. Now, how are you in a position to purchase that so? No comment. No comment to the question of whether you put a deposit down. No comment. Right, okay. Now, just to cover quickly vehicles, as well as we see you're in possession of a Toyota Hilux, I think it's called. Is that your property? No comment. Is it a hire purchase? No comment. Is it solely under your control? No comment. Do other people have access to use that vehicle? No comment. Do you allow other people to use that vehicle? No comment. The second vehicle I'd like to mention to you is a Toyota RAV4. Is that your vehicle? No comment. Is it hire purchase to you? No comment. Do you own it? No comment. Do you allow other people to drive it? No comment. Okay. Again, just sort of going along with the property side of things, you was arrested yesterday in Ipswich, and in the RAV4, which you were driving Jackie Street, being the passenger. There was, I think, 2 mobile phones within the vehicle, one on the dashboard, which I can't remember the make of at the moment. Is that your property? No comment. Is that Jackie Street's property? No comment. And there was an Ericsson mobile phone in like the central console. Was that your phone? No comment. Or Jackie Street's phone? I would like to say at this stage, I don't want to sound unreasonable. I don't want to be rude. No. I intend to make a no comment either every question you ask me, whether I feel it's relevant or not. Yeah. And so I don't want to continue all the way through this conversation. No comment, no comment. I just like it understood that each question that you put to me from now on, you can accept that my answer will be no comment. Right. Now, obviously, I've gone through your rights. Those rights continue throughout this interview and throughout this investigation right now. If you wish at any stage to make a comment to anything I've said, then it's still your right. Even I know, I understand your observations. I respect your observations, but your rights continue. Do you understand that? I do. Okay. Just saying, in relation to the mobile phones, the 2 in the vehicle, I believe that Ericsson, you're not going to answer me, but I would suggest that the Ericsson's the responsibility of Jackie Street's. And the other mobile phone, which you would say is your responsibility at the moment. And the previous to this one, you had a mobile phone prior to that, probably another one. Now, as we've said, it's a conspiracy. And just to outline a bit of the conspiracy is where one person sets up a deal with another person or persons in relation to the overall offence, which is why we're considering, and that being the importation of controlled drugs. Now, I'd just like to point out to you, obviously, I'm not trying to show you any disrespect at all, but obviously the possession of controlled drugs in this country is a criminal offence, as is the importation, and to be concerned in the supply of those is also illegal, but to conspire with others means your association with others and the deals that you've hatched. So my colleague would like to run through the people that we suggest to you that you've conspired with to see whether you have any reaction to what he's likely to say. Yeah. I mean, all I want to ask you really is that the names that I'm going to throw at you and just to see what your relationship is with them, Michael. I appreciate your position entirely, but by the same token, we have a duty to investigate an offence, so I still have to ask you these questions, okay? I understand, yeah. Fine, okay. Now, we've discussed Jackie Street, who you've said is your common law wife. Okay, you accept that. Peter Corey, what is your relationship with him? Are you not going to answer me? Are you just going to make no comment? Or I'm sorry. Like I said a little while ago, I don't want to sound unreasonable. I know you've got a job to do. I understand fully. But I think it's a bit foolish of me just to sit here, keep going, no comment, no comment. Okay, throughout the process. Okay, so you're just going to stay silent then? I would like you to ask a question, and then if you would accept the fact that the answer to your question is no comment, I would appreciate that. Thank you very much. Right, okay. So, Peter Corey then, what is your relationship with him? Darren Nichols, what is your relationship with him? Colin Bridge, Jack Wimes, Russell Tate. Russell Tate is a name I haven't heard mentioned this afternoon. Please carry on, but I'm making a comment that you haven't told me. It's, someone I'm just trying to ask about the association. I did mention there were some associates and Paul Gwennett. Is there anything you'd like to say about your association with any of these people? Okay, just going on from there again, just covering property. That's what described as a rigid inflatable boat that was used during this conspiracy. We say by you, you were the owner of that boat, having bought it from Humber Boats in Hull in April last year for cash, after having been paid £1,000 initially for cash, and then finishing it off the rest with cash as well. You store it at GT Commercials Barham in a shed under the control of Jack Wimes. Is there anything you'd like to say in relationship to your ownership of that boat? Going on from what my colleague has said, one of the associates that we'd like to discuss in your relationship with is Russell Tate, that we believe on the 20th of the 4th 96 was in Spain. Again, that's information that I haven't heard before. Please carry on. And you remained in Spain until the 9th of the 5th 96, when you then travelled to France. Between the 10th of the 5th 96 and the 11th of the 5th 96, had this been an interview where you'd taken your stance, or I'd like to discuss phone calls that you'd made from your mobile phone, a number which I've already read out to you, to Peter Corey, Jack Womes and Darren Nichols, people that we allege are involved in this conspiracy with you. A number of phone calls to these people over the period of time. And also on the 11th of the 5th 96, your vehicle was at GT Commercials in the evening. 10 minutes later, yourself and Jack removed the boat, the rib that I've mentioned before, from the shed where it was stored a number of weeks and months into the workshop to do some work on it. And on that same evening, you in fact using your mobile phone phoned Russell Tate. And again, I would have asked you some questions in relation to that phone call and the conversation held therein. Are you willing to discuss that in any way? I think you should take that as a no. I am. On the 12th of the 5th 96, I would have liked to discuss with you the phone call made from your phone to Paul Gwinnett. As also you phoned on the same day Darren Nichols, Paul Gwinnett again, Jack Womes and the premises of GT Commercials. And on the same day a blue transit van, the vehicle that Jack Womes owns and uses on a regular basis, was pulling your boat on a trailer out of GT Commercials along the A14 to the mobile petrol garage at Nacton, where he met up with yourself, Darren Nichols and another male, you having arrived in a Jaguar motor vehicle. I would have liked to ask you questions in relationship to the reason for you paying for the petrol, the fuel that you put into the rib at that premises. I believe it to be £120. It was paid for in two separate amounts of £60 by you being in the kiosk area with Darren Nichols. The other male that arrived at the petrol garage with you having gone over to the boat, and all four of you would say then travelled in those vehicles to Levington where the rib was put in the water, you getting on the boat, Jack Womes then leaving in the transit van pulling the trailer, Darren Nichols leaving in the Jaguar, and then you going out to sea on the boat with the other male. Really, we go on there to say that you were seen in the early hours, beg your pardon, your boat was then seen in the early hours to approach the beach at Jaywick, Clacton, where it was met. When an exchange occurred, you then went back to sea and the vehicle that was used with the occupants left the beach. As far as we're concerned, you then took the boat back to the Ipswich docks, where the boat was lifted out of the water and taken away from the dockside by yourself and others. We then skip on a bit till yesterday and the afternoon when you was at Meadow Cottage, which you accepted at the beginning of this interview is your property, which you purchased, I believe you said Christmas time 95. You were then seen outside your premises with another male and Darren Nichols. There was a new style blue Ford Transit van there, and the Jaguar that I've already mentioned had been taken there by Nichols. Nichols at this time was in possession of a toolbox. There was a meeting held there, and we know that Darren Nichols left in the Jaguar, and as far as we're concerned, is it right, sorry to interrupt you, is it right there was a third person, there was an unnamed person as well? Yes, sorry, did I not just say that? I think he did, yeah. Sorry, I missed that, I apologise. As far as we're concerned, later on that day, you've seen in your convoy driving your RAV, Jackie Street being your passenger, being followed by Peter Corey, who's also in custody here, driving the blue transit van, which we know is the property of Jack Womes. He drove via the A12 to Ipswich, where he was arrested and cautioned. And I can't remind you of your reply to the caution at this stage, because I've inadvertently left it on another piece of paper, and I cannot recall that it was be documented. I guess you're making no comment and don't wish to discuss what you may have said at the time. I can do that at a later interview. The basis of this allegation is that you conspired with others to import drugs. The toolbox, which I've mentioned seen in possession of Darren Nichols at your property whilst in your company, we would say was a toolbox recovered from Darren Nichols' possession later on that day prior to your arrest. Could you say that again? The toolbox in question, which was in possession of Darren Nichols at your property in Meadow Cottage in your company with the other male, we will say that is the same toolbox that was later recovered that day in the possession of Darren Nichols, and in that toolbox was found 10 kilos of cannabis resin. We say that cannabis resin is part of a consignment that was imported in this country by you using your boat during the time period that we have said arranged by you and your associates to be brought in the early hours of yesterday morning, and then to be dispatched around the countryside to various sources. Do you understand the seriousness of that accusation? I certainly do, yes. And you understand what the basis of that accusation is? I'm not asking you to accept it or to agree with it, but do you understand the basis of the accusation? I understand it. Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt. I'm sure that there can't be any doubt in your mind, then, Michael, that we're saying that you are the person that left the UK in the early hours of that morning in your boat and drove to the continent and actually collected a commodity and returned it to this country where it was brought ashore. There can be no doubt, I'm sure, in your mind as to what we're saying. And as long as you understand that, obviously, we have to give you the opportunity, knowing what the basis of this allegation is, to make any comment that you wish, anything you wish to say about what we've discussed with you. And I accept what's been said before, but I have to ask you whether is there any information you'd like to give us at this stage about your involvement or anyone else's involvement in an importation of controlled drugs into this country. I have to give you that opportunity. You're staying silent to that there isn't anything else that I can think of. Just to really point it out to you, there are a number of other people in custody in relation to this conspiracy. It is a lengthy inquiry. It is a lengthy process of interviews and dissemination of evidence and information. I've said to you that we're doing that diligently as we can. There are other interviews that have got to take place and are taking place at this time, so things may take a little longer, but it will pan out, hopefully, so you know where your position lies. Part of the reason for this new caution that my colleague gave you at the start of this interview is because there's been a change in the law, and under certain circumstances, and I do have to stress it, under certain circumstances, I'm sure that your solicitor will advise you accordingly that at some stage this case does go to court, that again, under certain circumstances, there are influences that can be drawn by a jury at the end of the day for the fact that you're not making any replies to the questions that we put to you, okay? And I think I'll just make that point to you. I do understand it. Along those lines, is there any explanation that you can give as to why you took the rigid inflatable out into the North Sea into the early hours of that morning? Any legitimate explanation that you can give as to what might explain why that happened? And again, I take this silence as no comment. If we were to sit here for the next 3 hours, which I can assure you we're not going to, but I'd like to just ask you to acknowledge that at some stage, if we were to sit here for the next 3 hours and ask you questions about this matter, would it always be your intention to make no comment? Yes, that's with respect. I understand fully you've got to ask me, but I don't want to sit here like a dummy. I do understand what you're trying to reach, that I've thought about it. I've taken advice, and I do feel like by adopting my statutory right to remain silent, it's perfectly adequate for me. Fine, okay. Well, under those circumstances, I have no further questions at this stage that I need to put to you. This interview has been tape recorded. I'm Detective Constable Shakespeare from the Essex Police Central Detective Unit at the police headquarters. The time by my watch is now 22:30 hours. It is still the 14th of the 5th, 96, and I'm in an interview room at Colchester Police Station. Also present in the interview room is DC Norton, Detective Constable, also from the Central Detective Unit, and also Chris Bowen. I'm Chris Bowen, a solicitor from Jeeps and Sons here in Colchester, and I'm going to explain my role at the interview is to protect my client's basic and legal rights. I'm here to advise him at all times. Thank you. We're investigating the offence to have a conspiracy to import controlled drugs, as you're aware, and a record of this interview is obviously being made, and you may be giving it to you in evidence if you are brought to trial. Could you first of all tell us your full name and address, please? My name is Michael John Steele. My address is Oaklands, Angers Green, Colchester. Thank you very much. I gave that as my address. The property is going for under sale. There is another property which I own, which I'm living in at the moment. It's being renovated, which is Meadow Cottage, London Road, Clacton-on-Sea. Okay. I'll remind you that, of course, you're still under caution, whereby, I understand. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you may say may be given in evidence. I understand, yeah. Good, okay. And you understand that as per our previous interview, the reasons what we're saying that you're under arrest? Yes, I do. You obviously now have an opportunity, Mickey, to consider what was said to you in the last interview. Right, yes. Is there anything at this stage in this interview that you'd like to say to me about the questions that were put to you previously? No. Not at all, no. I asked you obviously to account for your whereabouts and your movements over the weekend. It is still your intention, I would think, if I was to ask you the same questions, to make no comment or maintain your right to silence. Yes, I'd like to adopt my statutory right and adopt the no comment. Okay. I have to appraise you of early developments in this case, and I have to say that since our last interview, it's come to my notice that during a search of Meadow Cottage, which has been undertaken by my colleagues, that a firearm has been recovered that I understand is an 8-shot pump-action automatic shotgun. Whichever way you want to describe it, it was recovered from the loft of your house, hidden under the floorboards, I understand. Is there anything you'd like to tell me in relation to that firearm that's been recovered? I have no comment. Okay. Is it your firearm, your gun? No comment. 8-shot pump-action shotgun is a prohibited weapon under the Firearms Act, and it's such an offence to possess it. Do you hold any sort of firearm certificate at all? No comment. I also understand that, having checked your previous record, that you've served a term of imprisonment, which would mean that you are what we call a prohibited person, i.e. you're not allowed to possess a firearm, having served a term of imprisonment. Are you aware of that? No comment. Okay. I also understand that, again from my colleagues, that a search has been made at your address at Anglers Green. During the course of that search, I understand that my colleagues have recovered some other items, first of all being a dry suit, survival suit, obviously used in yachting or whatever. Any reason why you should possess that? Are you a yachting man, or any reason why you should have that in your house? No comment. Is that dry suit, survival suit your property? No comment. I also understand that it was a handheld satellite navigation handset system. I am not a technical man, I don't understand exactly what it is, but it's a handheld sat nav. Anything you'd like to tell me about that? I think you're wrong. I'll answer something. I think you're mistaken. As you say, you're not, I haven't, and again, I haven't seen it. It's what I've been told. I think what you found probably wasn't in the house. It was sitting on the step outside. Right. And I think what you found in the bag are 2 VHF radios, handheld radios. Right. Communication radios, marine bank radios, and there is 1 night lens. Right. I think that's what you found. Well, I mean, it wasn't switched on, but it appeared to be like waterproof. One of them is a waterproof radio. Right, okay. So it's not a navigation system. No. Right, okay. Thanks for clearing that up. Why have you got that radio? No comment. I also understand that there were some maps, navigational maps, that were recovered during the search as well. Anything you'd like to tell me about those? No comment. Have we got those? Yes. Can we have a look at those? There's 1, 2, 3 maps. We're just showing you that the 3 maps in question to Steele, in Thames Estuary northern part, with drawing on in blue, in particular there, Mr. Steele. I just draw your attention at this stage is the location of Jaywick, in particular marked, and no other way along the coastline can I see a similarly marked place with a navigational reading. Just showing it to your solicitor as well. Jaywick. Can you see that's where I'm pointing? I can see, yes. Right, okay. I won't attempt to explain what that means. Another map, Thames Estuary southern part again, with blue ink on, particularly at the top there. I assume that's where the boys of Swing Spitway and Whittaker. I'll show that to your solicitor as well. And another map, in particular on the left-hand side, at the top is a white piece of paper stuck on top of the River Cloyne, Brightling Sea on the top. 7 buoys mentioned, all with the navigational coordinates, and in the centre is Gunfleet Sand and of the Clacton Sea. And the rear is what I describe as a navigational route with readings and degrees marked on the bottom left-hand corner. North-east Gunfleet is shown with a navigational reading. Bottom right-hand corner is Pie End. I'll show you those to your solicitor. Thank you. Okay, sir. All believed to be found in the same holdall as you've described. Are they your maps? No comment. Seeing that one of them is obviously got some calculations and handwriting on, is that your handwriting? Show me what? Where do you mean? Any of those markings really is what we're... They're all my markings on those maps. On all these maps, on all these 3, I think there's one on the back, isn't there? The drawings. That's the plain piece of paper that I'm indicating to you there. Obviously leads me on to... I don't know anything about your background as such. You know, if you're a yachting man, or if you're interested in yachting or navigation, or if you've done a night course or anything like that, that can help me understanding why you've got that, because obviously I'm saying it's pertinent to what I'm looking at, Mickey. If it's then again, it's your opportunity to, I understand, tell me your point you're making, and I still adopt my sanctuary right and have no comment. I do fully understand the point that you're trying to make. And I, for the part, because we're professional people, understand your part as well. But nevertheless, I've still got to ask you the questions, which I understand. I mean, to us, just taking a quick glimpse, it would be a route back from the continent to, see, this is to back. I have to be perfectly honest with you. It's something that I'm just not going to go into. It's no comment, and you're no comment. Perhaps with the benefit of the tape, and if you don't want to do it yourself, perhaps you'll allow me to describe the clothing that you're wearing. Certainly. Can you confirm for the benefit of the tape that you're wearing a pair of black shoes? Yes. A pair of blue trousers? That's correct. And a mid-grey long-sleeve college shirt? That's correct, yes. That was obviously the clothing that he was arrested in yesterday? Yes, correct, yes. You haven't had a change of clothing? No, I haven't changed the clothing. Okay, fine. Again, if we were to sit here for the next couple of hours and chat about things, would your stance change in any way, shape or form? No. To the fact that you're not going to make any comment? No comment. To the questions that I ask you, and that's an advice of how you feel, and of course your solicitor? Exactly, yes. Okay. One point that I've noticed, just looking at the records here, that I didn't mention to your solicitor, and that I'd like to do now, is that there was a quantity of money found as well at Anglers Green, which I'd forgotten about. How much money? Can you tell me, please? 5,000, which was... Sorry, I'm not aware of this. Okay, yeah, I forgot about that. I hadn't mentioned it because I'd forgotten all about it again. I don't expect you to answer to it, but I just wanted to say to you that I understand there was a quantity of money that was found at that address. If you want to pause this interview to speak to me about that, Mr. Steele, you're welcome to do so. Sorry? If you want to discuss that matter, which has only just come out to attention in private with me, you can do so. It's no comment. Okay, thank you very much. So we're talking here about a conspiracy to import controlled drugs. It may perhaps come to you as no surprise that our operation has covered a period of time. And we're not just talking about a period of time over the weekend. I understand. So I don't intend to go into anything else at all now because we haven't appraised your solicitor exactly what the situation is. But I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm saying to you. We believe that you've been involved, Mickey, over a period of time in the importation of controlled drugs, going back to a period of at least last year. We also believe that one of these importers at least involved other people by the name of Pat Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe. These people that I've mentioned, they were murdered in December 95, and I have to tell you that you are now under arrest at this time on the suspicion of the following. The first is being involved in the murder of Pat Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe in December 95, and also in further conspiracies to import controlled drugs into the country. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do mention one question in court something which you rely on later on in court, and anything you do say may be given in evidence. I understand. I wish to conclude the interview at that point. Can I just say you haven't arrested him for the gun-related evidence? Good. My colleague has just reminded me that I haven't in fact also arrested you for the possession of the shotgun. Yes, that was found at the house. So I must also tell... Do I understand that I'm under arrest for participating in the murder of Patrick Tate? On suspicion of being involved in the murder. They're free now, you're saying, isn't it? Yes. So just so that you're clear, I've arrested you now on suspicion of further importations, conspiracy involving further importation of controlled drugs. I understand. On suspicion of being involved in the murder of the three men that I've mentioned, and also on suspicion of being in possession of the shotgun that was recovered. I'll make one comment in answer to your arrest or charging against that murder. I'm a totally innocent party. Right. Well, I'm not going to ask you any questions about that. I just feel at this stage, something of that calibre, I must definitely express that I'm totally innocent party. Nothing whatsoever. I do not know anything whatsoever. Is there any particular reason why you've waited this long to discuss that? Because obviously that's the most serious charge. You've been discussing it all day and all night. I'm not prepared to discuss it any further on tape. It's not fair for me to go into it. It's right that you haven't told me about this beforehand, isn't it? No. Okay. Okay, right, so now it's my intention now to conclude the interview. It's still Tuesday the 14th of the 5th, 96, and by my time, the watch is now 22:45. I intend to conclude this. This interview is taking place at Colchester Police Station on Thursday the 16th of the 5th, 96, and the time by my watch now is 12:54. I'm Philip Norton, a detective constable for the Central Detective Unit, Police Headquarters, Chelmsford, Essex. There's another police officer in the room. It's DC Shakespeare, also from the Central Detective Unit at Essex Police Headquarters, Chelmsford. We're here to interview Michael Steele, and there's another person in the room. I'm Christopher Bowen. I'm a solicitor from Jeeps & Sons here in Colchester. After my client had introduced himself, I have an opening statement to make. And here in the room is... My name is Michael John Steele of Oaklands. That's Anglers Green, Colchester. And before this interview continues by the police, I have something that I'd like to ask you that I understand this morning. Time started at 12:54. I'll start again. I understand this morning that you've had words with my solicitor, Mr. Christopher Bowen, and I believe you've told him something to the effect that I intend sacking him and his firm of solicitors once this goes to court. A statement which clearly undermines the confidence between my solicitor and me. Is totally untrue. Did you say that to him? No, I didn't, and that's incorrect. DC Shakespeare? No. What I said, in fact, was quite simply that I understood that on one of your previous trials that you represented yourself, and perhaps that you would sack Mr. Bowen and represent yourself on this one. Why? Why did you make such a statement? That statement is clearly undermining of the confidence between my solicitor, Mr. Christopher Bowen, who has conducted himself up until now expertly and confidently. Then if there was any offence taken, then I apologise to both you and Mr. Bowen, and there was no offence intended. I just wish to clarify what was said when I arrived for the briefing. You, DC Shakespeare, and I'm only talking to you about this because you're the person that made those remarks to me. You inquired as to the well-being of my client. I replied that he was fine. You then suggested that I was aware that my client was writing copious notes. I didn't really give you an answer to that, and you then suggested that my client may sack myself and Jeeps & Sons and represent himself. You then asked me if I was aware that Mr. Steele had previously sacked previous solicitors and represented himself. As you'll be aware, I replied that even if I had answered those questions, I couldn't possibly answer because there is a complete confidentiality between my client and myself. That's right. You're certainly correct. And you did say that. Thank you very much. You did. I'd like to confirm that. Absolutely correct. After that opening, I'd like now to begin my opening statement proper, and that's this. I've said of my solicitor, my role at this interview is to advise Michael John Steele to the best of my ability. I shall intervene in this interview if he requires any legal advice or assistance, or your questions become inappropriate, or you make matters known in this interview which hasn't been discussed with me beforehand. Now I confirm we've had a briefing before this interview started, and that briefing consisted of myself giving a one-page summary, and also I asked some questions and I received replies. I wish to say this. My client, having taken advice from me, has instructed me that he wishes to exercise his right to silence at this interview. I wish to say, for the benefit of the tape, that my client has been under arrest and in police custody in total since Monday the 13th of the 5th, 96, when he was arrested at 3:10. Since 12:45 on Wednesday the 15th of the 5th, 96, that's yesterday, Mr. Steele has been in police custody relating to an arrest regarding importation of controlled drugs and murder. I wish to make it clear that until 11:25 on Thursday the 16th of the 5th, 96, this morning, no information regarding this new matters of murder and the importation of controlled drugs has been given to me by the police. Any information I've gained appears to have been via local and national newspapers, including the East Anglian Daily Times and the Times. Considering the police are investigating at least 2 new serious arrestable offences, the disclosure of a one-page summary without evidence to justify its contents, it's wholly insufficient to allow me, as a solicitor, to advise Michael John Steele, my client, properly. The police are investigating a triple murder and importation of cannabis. I do not consider at this stage, given the disclosure I've received, there is any evidence to link Mr. Steele with either an importation of cannabis between the 1st 11th 95 and the 21st 11th 95, or in murder, which is supposed to have taken place on the 6th of the 12th, 95. I consider I've not received adequate, let alone full disclosure. During this interview, the police also wish to ask questions about 150 kilograms of cannabis found at the premises of my client's mother. The police have confirmed to me that these drugs relate to a charge which has already been laid against my client and for which he has already been remanded in custody. Accordingly, I wish to object to the line of questioning relating to the 150 kilograms of cannabis seized on the 15th of the 5th, 96. That's yesterday. If the police in this interview wish to pursue the aforementioned line of questioning, I wish to bring it to their attention that the old right to silence still applies, and that accordingly no interference can be drawn on any silence my client wishes to exercise in any event. My authority for that C16.5 of the current codes of practice, as far as many questions relating to the murders are concerned. I have already stated that I have not seen any evidence implicating my client. This applies equally to the alleged importation of cannabis in November 95. Now, during the meeting we had earlier on, after I was shown the one-page summary, I asked the officers what written statements they had. DC Shakespeare replied, "We have 2 databases on the home's computer system. There are at least 300 statements." I asked how many statements implicate my client. DC Shakespeare shrugged his shoulders when asked that. He then said, "It's not possible to provide me with those statements at the moment." When he was asked why by me, he said, "They're on the computer." I asked him, can he get printouts of the relevant statements to implicate my client, or the statements that implicate my client, if there are any. DC Shakespeare said, "We have given what we consider to be the fullest appropriate information at this stage, and we now wish to give your client his account of the incident." I then thanked you both officers, didn't I? And that was the conclusion of our discussion. However, DC Norton did, and I wish this to be fair to him, did then come speak to me and told me there was one very important thing I may want to now take notice of, and that was this. At least 150 kilograms of cannabis resin was recovered from the home address of blank Steele. This was found in a garage contained within, DC Norton said, 6 holdalls. This is the current state of play regarding disclosure. I've made my comments abruptly clear. I am grateful for your giving me this time to make this opening statement. I wish to pause now because my client will now make a prepared statement which will take some time to read out, and I ask for your patience while he does this, during which will be abruptly clear they will not answer any further police questions and wish for us to be taken to Chelmsford Prison forthwith. Mr. Steele, I'm now going to allow you to read your statement. Thank you very much. Prior to doing that, I wish to remind you of your legal rights. You have the right to your free legal advice at any time whilst you're here in custody at the police station, and it continues throughout the investigation. Do you understand that? I do. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you fail to mention when questioned, so that you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand that? I understand that, yes. Now, some objections were raised yesterday at the court in relation to your detention at this police station and the conditions for which you're being kept in, particularly the circumstances of the room which you're being held. You've been asked by my colleague this morning in the custody area, did you have a good night's sleep? And you confirmed to him in the affirmative. That was correct, yes. Do you feel fit and well for this interview to continue? I do. I've had a good night's sleep and I don't feel any fatigue whatsoever. Okay. I know that if you refuse to have your midday meal and you feel fed and watered sufficiently to know where you are and what you're saying to us during this interview. Yes, I've refused. Not refused. The meal was offered to me this morning, which I had a bite out of, which was the breakfast. Nothing wrong with the meal. Situation is, my appetite at the moment is just no good enough to eat any food. That's all it is. I was told you'd refused it. No. The terminology there isn't meant to implicate or... No, I'm not. I'm not refusing nothing. It's just that my appetite isn't there at the moment. Fine, that's okay. Right. And I'd like to quickly just read this. Yes. Which is a statement that I've prepared, which I'd like to draw to your attention. On Monday the 13th of the 5th, I was arrested along with my common law wife for the past 25 years, namely Miss Jacqueline Street, the person of exemplary character. The arrest was conducted in such a manner that a near fatal accident was avoided purely by my own driving ability. Our vehicle was rammed by 2 plainclothes policemen driving a vehicle in a malicious and dangerous manner. My wife, who is a cancer patient, was detained for 2 days in squalid conditions and shown no compassion of or reasonable respect by arresting officers. It was made known to the police that my wife had daily duties to perform regarding 2 retired horses, which are kept 5 miles from the home, duties which she was unable to pass on to anybody else. My wife was released and returned home after 2 days to find the home had been abused and damaged by the police search of the premises. No notice of this search was given to my legal representative, Mr. Christopher Bowen. Money was taken from the home, which was a loan to her from a relative pending the sale of her home. Proof can be shown and evidence provided that this money came from a perfectly legitimate source. Also taken was her own personal vehicle, which is financed to her and registered to her. In short, she has been maliciously penalised by overzealous police officers abusing police privilege. She is unable to perform daily duties because of this situation and has no one to turn to for immediate assistance. Her home is situated in a rural area and a vehicle is her livelihood. Since my arrest, I have shown every respect to arresting police officers. I've been polite and assisted them in their inquiries to date within the envelope of the law. During the search of another premises, a firearm was found, and because of the death of 2 or 3 people known to me, I have been charged in connection with these killings. Abrupt forensic science will prevail and clearly exempt the weapon found at my premises. The discovery of this weapon has been used for arresting police officers to sensationalise my appearance at Chelmsford Magistrates Court yesterday morning by releasing a press statement alleging my connection with the murder of the 3 people known to me, all of which is total nonsense. The entrance to the Magistrates Courts was total mayhem. The police escort to the hearing was classic choreography, with blue light flashing, driving through the red lights and along the wrong side of the street at breakneck speeds. Nothing will come of this murder charge, but the damage is clearly done. My pending trial for importation of cannabis will be the sensation of the year. The initial and main point of this statement is to make it abruptly clear at this stage that until my wife's vehicle is returned to her and I have confirmation from her that she's been given back the money taken from her, I have no intentions of taking part or assisting in any further interviews or any type of inquiry. Finally, the magistrate's hearing yesterday, Wednesday the 15th for the 5th, was to acquire further time for my presence in the police cells pending further inquiries and interviews. Since that hearing and the granting of a further 3 days laid down, I am still sitting in a squalid cell and have no contact with the arresting officer. It is now Thursday the 16th for the 5th. This interview commenced approximately 10 minutes ago. I'm now leaving this interview room and will not return. Resume any interviews until my wife's vehicle and money is returned to her. One other point I must make is hired items such as the chainsaws have been taken along with my own vehicle. I expect immediate returns of these items to then get returned to their rightful owners. That's all I have to say to you, and I do wish to leave. I will now and go back to the cell. Just make one thing clear. Yes, you have not been charged with murder, as you've said in your statement. You've been arrested. Okay, I stand corrected. I stand corrected. On suspicion, I stand corrected of being involved in the murder. You have the free right to leave this room. I just want to say one thing before you go. No court is likely to draw any advance influences from my client interest in the light of this defence representations in this interview. Thank you, Mr. Steele. You may now leave the interview room. If you're just escorting back, Richard, I'll conclude the interview. Yeah, do you want to conclude it? And I'll just take him back. At 13:09. This interview is being tape recorded and we're in an interview room at Colchester Police Station. The date is Friday the 17th for the 5th, 96, and the time by the clock on the wall is 10:13. I'm Philip Norton, a detective constable from the Central Detective Unit, Police Headquarters, Chelmsford, Essex. There's another police officer in the room. It's Steele Shakespeare, also from the Essex Police Detective Unit at Headquarters. Thank you very much. We're here to interview Michael Steele. Michael, just give us your full name, address and date of birth, please. My name is Michael John Steele. I live at Anglers Green, Colchester, and my date of birth is the 13th of the 1242. Thank you. And your solicitor? I'm Christopher Bowen, a solicitor from Jeeps & Sons in Colchester, and now required to explain my role at this interview is to advise and assist Mr. Steele, my client, throughout. I confirm that information has been given to me I'll go into more detail in a few minutes' time. That information has been given to me by yourselves, officers. I've advised my client on the information that's in my possession and he's instructed me that he wishes to exercise his right to silence. I'm now going to explain why that decision has been taken. Mr. Steele has been in custody since Monday the 13th of the 5th 96 when he was arrested at 3:10. He was initially questioned on matters which I hope are going to be unrelated to this interview. He was remanded in a local custody by Chelmsford Magistrates Courts on Wednesday the 15th of the 5th at 12:45. It's now Friday the 17th of the 5th, and as he said at the beginning of this interview when we started, it was 10:30 hours. The police did not provide any information to the defence regarding the importation of controlled drugs and murder until 11:25 on Thursday the 16th of the 5th 96, nearly a full 24 hours after he was initially remanded into a local police custody for these new offences. The information provided to the defence was a single A4 sheet of paper with some information containing varying when the first briefing took place with me on 11:25 on the Thursday the 16th of the 5th. I requested written statements. I was told by DC Shakespeare that there are 2 databases and a Holmes computer system containing over 300 statements in relation to the present inquiries. When I asked how many statements implicated my client, I received no verbal response. I asked to see statements, but was told it was not possible at that time, as they were on a computer. I asked for computer printouts of these statements. I was informed this: we have been given what we consider to be the fullest appropriate information at this stage, and we wish now to give your client his account of the incident. The only further information I was given after this was by DC Norton, who informed me that 150 kilograms of cannabis resin had been seized from the premises of my client's mother. Since the above has occurred, my client took part in a tape-recorded interview where it was made very clear he did not wish to answer any questions and left the room. That was yesterday. The police now wish to put questions to Mr. Steele about the importation of cannabis, murder, and wish to question him about an offence which has already been charged. However, no police disclosure has been made to me or my client by the police. I invite you, officers, at this juncture to suspend this interview to provide me with disclosure of evidence. I'll let you reply to that at the end of this introduction. My client faces allegations relating to 2 serious arrestable offences, one of which concerns a triple murder. You wish him to answer your questions. Before I can properly assist Mr. Steele on the alleged evidence against him, I need, as his solicitor, to be aware of that evidence. I am not aware of it, as you refuse to provide me with adequate, let alone full disclosure. Since the start of your present inquiries into my client, I've been given inaccurate information by police officers. Information has been given in court by the prosecutor, which was denied to me beforehand despite me asking directly about the information I required. On 2 many occasions to mention, I have requested disclosure of evidence. I have done so in this interview. The police tell me they have given me the fullest appropriate information at this stage indeed. Superintendent Story told me this morning during a telephone call. I believe this to be untrue. At Chelmsford Magistrates Court on Wednesday the 15th of the 5th, mention was made of a Land Rover, which apparently could be linked to my client. I was told that this would be relevant to the murder inquiry. When I was asked questions about this Land Rover at Chelmsford Magistrate Court, certain information was withheld from me. I noticed from this briefing sheet that the Land Rover is not mentioned in it. This is one clear example of the dishonest behaviour of the police in this inquiry into 2 serious arrestable offences. The police are clearly withholding vital information which I require to properly advise my client. Without it, I, as a solicitor, am in no position to advise him on the strength of the evidence against him. If I cannot do that, his only proper course of action, which I advise him to do so, is to exercise his right to silence at this interview. I ask you to respect his right to silence. Before I close, DC Shakespeare, I ask you to refrain from seeking to undermine the confidence Mr. Steele and I have in each other. Yesterday, you incorrectly told me that he was considering terminating his instructions to my firm. You've acknowledged that you'd done this on yesterday's taped interview. This morning, during a telephone call by you to my office, you told me that I did not need to come to the police station this morning, that the police would find a new solicitor for my client. I can only summarise that you did this to put pressure on me and hence my client. I find this totally unprofessional and ask you to refrain from any continuation of this improper behaviour. I have on no occasion refused to come to the police station. Indeed, I believe I have come to this police station at the earliest possible opportunity when I've been summoned to do so. As a result of everything I've said, my client has lost any faith in the conduct of this police investigation. I can understand why. Before I conclude this interview, my opening comment and allow you to begin this interview, I ask you to provide my client and I with all the evidence you have against him. Thank you. Finished, okay? I invite you to reply to my questions, please. I've just a number of things to say before in reply to what you said, Mr. Steele. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand that? You have the right to free legal advice at any stage of this inquiry, whether it be by person now or by using the telephone. Do you understand that? Well, yesterday served on your solicitor a briefing note so that we can be clear and you can be clear in any accusations that is being made against you. You're in police cells for the most serious offence of being concerned in the murder of Patrick Tate, Anthony Tucker and Craig Rolfe. You're also in custody at this police station at this stage in relation to conspiring with others to import controlled drugs, namely cannabis resin, into this country. You cannot be unclear at this time that those are the accusations being made. Within the briefing note, it states that the police have information that between the 1st 11th 95 and the 21st 11th 95, you along with others conspired to import these controlled drugs, and the persons mentioned were yourself, Jack Womes, Peter Corey, Darren Nichols, Patrick Tate, Anthony Tucker and Craig Rolfe. On this briefing note, the information will show and suggest that once imported and distributed, the cannabis resin was found to be of very poor quality, or part of it was found to be poor quality, and as a result part of it was returned and a refund was demanded. This brought about a breakdown in the relationships between you and your conspirators. There was a loss of face and credibility between the group. There is also information in relation that a number of you travelled to Ofsted, where Tate and Rolfe were handed back a cash refund in relation to that drug deal. I intend to begin this interview to ask you questions in relation to that. We have given what we consider to be the fullest appropriate information at this stage, and I wish to give you the opportunity of giving your account of that allegation and incident. Do you wish to make any comment in relation to that? I would like to intervene at this moment. I'm grateful for you reading through the briefing sheet. I can only say again that this briefing sheet contains very little detail. It contains concerns, allegations that you believe my client has been involved. I ask you please again to disclose me the evidence that you have which will presumably back up the allegations you're making. So far I've not seen any evidence, and I would like to see some evidence so I can properly advise my client and update my advice to him. At the moment I can only repeat what I've said at the beginning. I am in no position to properly advise him as to the strength of the evidence against him. If I cannot do that, his only recourse at this interview, any sensible recourse that he has, is to remain silent. If you wish to disclose further information, then please do so, because I would only be too happy to further take instructions from my client. You wanted my client to have another interview, and I've given you full cooperation by getting this interview arranged in this interview room that we're having here at the moment. But until we get any further information, my client will be saying absolutely nothing as is right. Thank you very much. What I would say is, I don't need to read all that out again, because the police say that you cannot be unclear about the reasons for your detentions at this police station at this time. I would like to say something to that. He's not. I'm certain not unclear as to the reasons for his detention. He's been arrested on suspicion of importation of cannabis. That's correct. And murder. The point at this interview. Before I can properly advise him, I have to know what strength of the evidence there is. And I think there is a difference between the reasons for his arrest and the strength of the evidence to back up the reasons for his arrest. And that's why my position is this. It's the evidence we're saying that we want to see, not the reason. I'm quite clear why he's in the police station. I'm not speaking for him, I'm speaking for myself. I'm quite clear, but what I would like to do is advise him as to the evidence. The interference from that is of course the fact of your solicitor is clear in the reasons for your detention. You cannot be unclear, so I wish to continue, if you don't mind, with this interview. Please continue with this interview, but I wish to make absolutely clear, Mr. Steele is going to say nothing at this interview. Yes, you've made your observations pretty clear, both during the magistrate's court and the number of representations your solicitor has made to us and to our senior investigating officer whilst we have attempted to conduct this inquiry and interview as expeditiously as we feel that we could. There have been a number of delays, obviously in the nature of the complex inquiry that it has been, and to ensure that we as investigating officers were in full possession of accurate facts at all stages. We felt that at certain times we needed to take time before coming and approaching you, and that is our situation now. In relation to the accusation of conspiracy, do you know Patrick Tate? Do you know Anthony Tucker? Do you know Craig Rolfe? Did you conspire with these persons prior to the 21st 11th 95 to import drugs into this country on the 8th and 9th of November 95? Did you have numerous contacts with those persons mentioned via the telephone prior to that date? Evidence will show that your mobile telephone number was in contact with Patrick Tate and Anthony Tucker, as was your home telephone number prior to that date on the 8th of November. Can I interrupt you there and ask why this will show, why they won't show it at the moment? You can interrupt me, but I will continue with my line of questioning. You don't wish to answer the question then. I will continue with my line of questioning. Police will show in relation to that Patrick Tate phoned you on the evening of the 9th of November 95 to ensure that even though you had been arrested, the controlled substances were secure. I would just like to ask, if I may, just referring to that phone call that we say that you took from Patrick Tate on that evening, if you can recollect that phone call at all, and if there's anything you can tell us about what you may have discussed with him during the course of that telephone conversation. Please carry on, my client's not going to say anything. Did you conspire with those persons prior to that date? Did you enter into agreement with Tate, Tucker and Rolfe to concern yourself in the supply of controlled drugs, and indeed the importation of those drugs? Very soon after, it became clear that the drugs were of poor quality. A cash refund was demanded. You travelled to Ostend. You were joined at Ostend by Patrick Tate, Anthony, Craig Rolfe, 3 girls, a man and a female. You hand over the refund. Your Barclaycard was used to pay the bill. The Burlington Hotel, Ostend, relating to that period of time for which you were in the country. I would just like to ask what you were doing in Ostend at that time. Any legitimate reason why you should have been over there? Please carry on, my client's not going to answer any questions. I'm thinking. After that period of time, you returned to the country as did the other persons I've mentioned. You then began to conspire with Tate and Tucker in relation to another importation of controlled drugs. You were seen to attend the home address of Anthony Tucker to pick up cash to pay for that new importation. You supposedly continued to organise this importation, which led to the incident on the 6th of December 95, when the 3 persons as mentioned were murdered in a lane in Retterdon. Some of the facts I've gone through already in this interview and ask you to make comment have been confirmed by Darian Nichols, who is in custody at this time, giving a full account of his movements, his association with you, his telephone calls with you, his conversations with you. Mr. Steele, I advise you not to make any comment anyway, but as far as Mr. Nichols is concerned, you say he's in custody, but I'm not aware of what he said. I have no details of what he said. I couldn't possibly advise you to comment on matters I'm unaware of, so Mr. Steele, please feel free to continue to remain silent. Michael, just so that you're perfectly clear, we're saying that when you were detained by my colleagues from the Customs and Excise on the 8th of November 95, following your boat having been impounded on the beach at Felixstowe, we are saying that was the occasion that the cannabis was then found to be of poor quality. It was actually brought into this country, and if you hear us refer to it between ourselves in this interview that we call it the bad cannabis conspiracy, that's what we're referring to. The conspiracy that occurred between the 1st 11th 95 and the 21st 11th 95. So again, just to make it clear in your own mind, that is what we're saying, that the bad cannabis was brought in, all the cannabis of poor quality anyway. In relation to that actual incident, the actual physically bringing that load into the country, is there anything at this stage that you wish to say to me about your involvement or any knowledge that you have in that offence? If I pause at something because I'm thinking, I accept the fact you're going to stay silent. On the 21st 11th 95, As we've said, your Barclaycard was used to pay a bill at a Burlington hotel at Ostend. Can you tell me how you travelled out to the continent on that occasion? By which means? Could you tell me if you travelled with anybody else on that occasion? Is it possible for you to give me any reason as to why you was in Ostend on that date? Is it possible for you to tell me who else may have access to your Barclaycard? Can you confirm to me whether or not that it was you that actually signed the bill at the Ostend hotel on that date? I'd like to ask you about your relationship with a girl by the name of Sarah Saunders, who was the girlfriend of Patrick Tate. And I would ask if there was anything you'd like to tell me about your relationship with her. Could you tell me what your relationship is with a man by the name of Nichols, who, as you're aware, is in custody as part of those offences? Could you tell me anything about your relationship with him? As it's clear from the briefing sheet that has been given to your solicitor, and also now read over to by my colleague, it is the police's view that you have been involved in the murder of Tony Tucker, Tate and Craig Rolfe. Nichols has, during the course of a number of interviews with other colleagues of mine, given information with regard to that particular offence. That information, of course, has just been given to me, isn't it, D.C. Shakespeare? I continue with my questions, Mr. Steele. Can you confirm that you first met Darren Nichols while she was in custody at Hollesley Bay a number of years ago? Is it true that Darren Nichols is an associate of yours who has, over a period of time, done a number of jobs for you, including work at your cottage at Meadow Cottage in Clacton? Can you confirm to me, or deny in fact, that in December 94, on a date as yet unknown, you travelled to Amsterdam in company? Sorry, I've gone too far there. Can you confirm that in November 95, on a date unknown in 94, Darren Nichols travelled to Amsterdam at your behest together with another person's and went to a premises at your behest known as Stone's Bar? Is there anything you'd like to tell me about that premises in Amsterdam? Do you know anyone in Amsterdam by the name of Stone? Is it true that on that occasion you paid the sum of £1,000 to Darren Nichols for travelling to Amsterdam in company with a male called Peter on that occasion? Is it true that Darren Nichols subsequently worked for you at Meadow Cottage in a period of November 95, where he cleaned a barn at premises at Meadow Cottage in preparation for a bonfire night celebration? Moving on specifically to the allegation of the conspiracy involving you and the bad cannabis importation, again for the period the 1st of November 95 to the 21st of November 95. Is it true that following those drugs being imported into this country, we say by yourself that you gave Darren Nichols 50 kilograms of cannabis, which he tells us he took and placed in the boot of a car, which was then under his control in Braintree? Did you ask Darren Nichols to do that, Mr. Steele? Darren Nichols tells us that he went out with you to Holland via Harwich on a ferry, where he was with you, met the Stones brothers that I've mentioned as being from Stone's Bar in Amsterdam. Did you travel to Holland on that occasion with Darren Nichols? I'd like to say at this point that most of the information given at this interview has not been given to me beforehand. As far as the Stones brothers are concerned, I've never heard those names before, and I object to information being given at this interview which hasn't been given to me beforehand. I'm not going to stop the interview at this stage because my client is going to remain silent. We are clearly saying that once again to reiterate the point, Mr. Steele, that subsequently, and you'll find out that because of the bad feeling that existed subsequently between yourself, and we say Pat Tate and Tony Tucker in particular, regards to the bad cannabis importation, that was one of the main reasons why you felt so aggrieved to get involved in the shooting and the murder of those three men. Did you have anything to do, Mr. Steele, with the murder of Tony Tucker, Pat Tate and Craig Rolfe? As I've explained to you, Darren Nichols has told us that you went out to Holland with him, where you met up with the Stones brothers, and they repaid you the sum of £170,000, a mixture of sterling and guilders, which was repayment to you from them for the bad cannabis. That's new information as far as the solicitor is concerned. Did you then get into a cab, Mr. Steele, with Darren Nichols and travel from Amsterdam railway station to Ostend? When you were in Ostend, Mr. Steele, did you phone Pat Tate and your associate Jack Wombs? Would you like to tell me how much Patrick Tate's share of the money that was repaid to you by the Stones brothers was to be repaid to him? Darren Nichols tells us that Tate and the other people that have been mentioned to you by my colleague subsequently met up with you in Ostend, obviously for the purposes of sharing out the monies that you'd been repaid by the Stones brothers. Is there anything you'd like to tell me about that particular repayment and how it came about? Darren Nichols tells us that yourself, Tate, Rolf and the others had a meet in Ostend and he had a bit of a jolly, a few beers together. And then you subsequently went out for a meal with Darren Nichols and you were joined during the course of that meal by Jack Womes. Is that correct? And then you carried on coming back to the UK where Darren Nichols carried on working for you at Meadow Cottage. Do you know anyone by the name Mr. Steele of Mullock? I've never heard of the name Mullock before. I'm the solicitor and you can spell the name Mullock for me please, D.C. Shakespeare. Mr. Steele, I believe it's spelled M-U-L-O-O-C-K. Thank you, Mr. Shakespeare. But don't hold me to that, that's how I believe it is. Anything that you can tell me about that name and anybody that you've known by that name, because it is alleged by Darren Nichols that you told him that Pat Tate, one of the men who was subsequently murdered, was the sum of £40,000 from the Mullock brothers in relation to the bad cannabis importation, and that money was obviously owed back to the Mullock brothers. However, they spell their name. They are obviously going to be looking for their money back. Does that name mean anything to you? Do these circumstances mean anything to you that I've outlined? It transpires, I understand, from Darren Nichols that about 1/3 of the poor cannabis that you brought back into the country, we say was sellable, i.e. was of sufficient quality that you were able to make some money on it, and that Patrick Tate, he says, took those drugs up north somewhere in this country, and presumably did with that what he wanted. Well, I wouldn't imagine that you'd been very happy about that, would you, Mr. Steele? Would you like to tell me about a relationship that Sarah Saunders has with your common law wife, Jackie Street? Are they friends? Have you ever, at any stage, Mr. Steele, paid any monies to Sarah Saunders in relation to property to maintain her lifestyle? On the 8th of the 11th, 95, the day that you brought the bad cannabis importation into the UK, Pat Tate, as my colleagues outlined to you, was arrested on a drink driving charge in Southend when he was driving a Porsche belonging to Tony Tucker. That, of course, was the same day, as I've said, you were stopped on the beach. Were you aware that Pat Tate had in fact been arrested on that same day? Was there ever an occasion, Mr. Steele, when yourself, Patrick Tate and perhaps Darren Nichols, Sarah Saunders were together at a house to mend a cooker? Does that ring any bells to you at all? Darren Nichols has told us that, Can we just stop there a moment? Yes, let's stop the interview. I just want to say something. If you want to console your solicitor in private, fine. Let us stop, Mr. Steele, yes. Okay, just fine. I don't want a period of time. I just want to... If you want to do it in private... Yes, 2 seconds. I'd be happy to speak in front of these officers because we have the right to. Well, basically, yeah. What you were saying just then, I didn't quite... You've got some notes there, haven't you? I have some notes here. Let's stop the interview. I mean, it's 40 minutes gone. Let's have a break here. We can start a new tape in a few minutes' time. Can we have a cup of tea? Yes, I think a break would be a good idea at this stage. Please, officers, if you don't mind. Okay, it's 10:54 and we'll have a short break. This interview is being tape recorded at Colchester Police Station on Friday the 17th of the 5th, 96, and the time is now 11:28. I'm Philip Norton, a detective constable for the police headquarters, here to interview Michael Steele. There's another police officer in the room. D.C. Shakespeare, Essex Police Headquarters, Chelmsford. Thank you. Mr. Steele, could you introduce yourself, please? My name is Michael Steele. I live in Colchester. My date of birth is the 13th of the 12th, 42. Okay. You don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence. You do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. If I can just interrupt. Hang on. We've just had a short interlude where you've had opportunities to speak to your legal advisor and you've had further refreshment. Are you happy for the interview to continue at this stage? Yes. Thank you. You have certain rights. I've just cautioned you and remind you of your right to speak as you will. You have the right to seek legal advice at any stage, which will be free of charge to yourself. Do you understand that? Yes. Your solicitor is in the room and I'm sure he'd like to introduce himself. Thank you very much. I'm Christopher Bowen, a solicitor with Jeeps & Sons here in Colchester. I'm here to explain my role, which is to advise and assist my client throughout the interview. At the first interview this morning, I made a very long opening statement. I don't propose to repeat that because I want to save as much time as I can today. Thank you. However, everything I've said this morning still applies. All I'd like to say at this stage is this. During the first interview, many facts were given which had not been discussed with me beforehand. As I said at that interview, I was disappointed by that. I'd like at this juncture to give you another opportunity of considering giving us further disclosure before the interview continues. I'd like to do that now and give you the chance of saying yes or no to that. Can you give me any further disclosure before we continue, please? No. Okay, thank you. All I want to say is, I cannot advise my client appropriately if I do not know what the strength of the evidence against him is. As a result, I find myself yet again having to advise him that he should exercise his right to silence, because I cannot advise him as to the strength of the case against him. I ask you again to respect his right to silence. He knows that you've got to ask questions at this interview. I realise that I'm now going to give you the opportunity of continuing with this. Before I do that, the purpose of our break obviously is a confidential matter, but I've got one question to ask. Could you please, for our benefit, repeat the last question that we'd reached before my client asked for the interview to be suspended? My notes, I don't want to go exactly what my notes say, but there was mention made of a cooker. I wonder if you could repeat that question, that it began, was there one occasion when... Yeah, the question was, Mr. Steele, was there an occasion when yourself had been in company with Sarah Saunders and Pat Tate and any others in the house to mend a cooker? Was Darren Nichols one of these people as well, D.C. Shakespeare? Because I've got a note of Nichols' name here. Yes, so it was Nichols, Sarah Saunders, my client and Patrick Tate, yes? And any others, if there were any others. I don't know whether there was or whether there wasn't. That's why I'm asking your client. Thank you very much, D.C. Shakespeare. Okay. Could I just say one thing before you continue? You have now had half an hour break with your legal advisor. You've been asked by myself if you'd wish to have any further time in which to consult with him. Is that true? Do I need any further time? Yes, no. I've given you the opportunity. Right, okay. And was quite rightly been pointed out by your legal advisor a number of facts which were put to you during a lengthy interview this morning, for which you remained silent during that time. Do you accept that? Yes. Is there anything you'd like to say now? You've been reminded of your legal rights, and you've been reminded of the words of the caution. Is there anything you'd like to say in relation to the facts and accusations, questions that were put to you on the first interview? I take your silence as meaning no. Thank you. That's exactly the point I was actually going to raise. If I could just expand the length for the moment, please. Your solicitor has made various representations to us both in private and also within the interview situation. Mr. Steele, by his claim that at all times he feels as if he hasn't been appraised enough of all the information to advise you properly. We, of course, have replied that we feel that he has been given enough significant information. During the course of the interview, as my colleague has pointed out, you have been asked certain questions and obviously certain matters have arisen that you are now aware of. You must be aware that at any stage, if you wish to make comment, having now heard what we've said to you on anything, that is your entitlement to do that, bearing in mind that your solicitor has said that he doesn't feel as though he's been appraised enough. I don't want you to lose sight of the fact because it is your right, and this is your interview. Do you understand that? Shake of the head, nod. Yes, I understand that. Fine, okay, thank you. Moving on into the questions with regard to the events that we say happened last year. We mentioned the name of the Mullick brothers, the spelling of which I gave you. If it's incorrect, then I apologise, but certainly a name of that ink. And I asked you whether you knew anyone of that name, and you obviously maintained your right to silence. Having now had an opportunity to think about it, is there anything you'd like to say about your knowledge of these persons by that name, and any dealings that you've ever had with them in the past? Is it true, Mr. Steele, that you've known Pat Tate for a number of years, and that Pat Tate at one stage, for whatever reasons, was perhaps getting a little bit too big for his boots within your fraternity, your circles, perhaps getting a little bit too above himself? Was that perhaps true? Darren Nichols has told us that Pat Tate told the Mullick brothers, bearing in mind that the Mullet brothers are still owed quite a substantial quantity of money from your bad cannabis importation. It is alleged that Pat Tate said to the Mullet brothers at one stage that it would put you, Mr. Steele, on your knees before them. That's what Pat Tate said. Have you ever heard from anyone that such a conversation occurred between Pat Tate and the Mullet brothers? Because certainly, if I'd heard that, I wouldn't be too happy that someone had said they would do that to me, as I'm sure perhaps you weren't very happy if and when you heard it. Sarah Saunders is a name that we've mentioned, as you already know. Sarah Saunders was the ex-girlfriend of Patrick Tate. I've asked you questions about your relationship with her, which you've chosen to stay silent about. I have to ask you, was there ever an occasion where Sarah Saunders had repeated to you that conversation that he had had with the Mullet brothers? Because Darren Nichols is telling us that Sarah Saunders certainly did relay that conversation to you. I'd like to just say at this point that information is new to me. It's not information I've been given before. I'm not going to ask to suspend the interview, and again, I advise my client to remain silent at this point. Thank you. Did you ever hear at any stage, Mr. Steele, from any source that Patrick Tate was looking to do you harm in some fashion? Did you, Mr. Steele, at any stage, as a revenge against Pat Tate, make up a story or conspire with others to actually carry out a further importation of cocaine into this country, for which you told Patrick Tate that he and his associates, namely Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe, will be included? The big one, the biggie. Cocaine is worth a lot of money, isn't it? Perhaps the most serious commodity. I'm unaware of anything to do with cocaine. No offence of cocaine has been mentioned to me, the solicitor, before this hearing, this interview began. I'd like to make that clear. Thank you. I was just asking you, Mr. Steele, whether you'd ever told Patrick Tate that he would be involved in any deal involving a large importation of cocaine. Is there any comment you'd like to make to me about such a conversation that you may have had? Darren Nichols tells us on the 6th of December 95, which I'd like to make clear in early stages is the day that Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe were murdered, that he was working at Heathrow Airport. I'm not exactly sure what his job is, it slips my mind at the moment, but he was working at Heathrow Airport, and he says he received a telephone call from you asking him to meet you at a place in Marks Tay, Parkinson's shop, I believe. I don't know what that is. Are you aware, Mr. Steele, of what Parkinson's shop in Marks Tay is? I'm certainly not aware of Parkinson's shop Marks Tay because it hasn't been mentioned before to me. Having done some research into telephone calls that were made amongst those that have been arrested on or in connection with the matter on the 6th of December, I found that there are a number of phone calls around the lunchtime period of the 6th of December being made from Darren Nichols' mobile phone, which is shown to be the subscriber to you, both on your mobile and also at your home address. Those telephone calls span in a period of 12:51 p.m. on the 6th of December to 12:54. 3 of those telephone calls that he made or that were made on his mobile phone to your mobile didn't connect. At 12:59 hours, like lunchtime on the 6th of the 12:95, our inquiries have shown that a telephone call was made from your home address to a telephone, a mobile telephone subscribed and belonging to, we say, Mr. Jack Womes. And as you're aware that he's already in custody in relation to these matters, could you please tell me what that telephone call was about? The call that you made. If you didn't make such a telephone call at 12:59, could you perhaps tell me who might have done? Could you tell me where you were around lunchtime on the 6th of December? Concentrating purely on the telephone calls that we say were made during that afternoon amongst you, yourself, Darren Nichols and Jack Womes, both on landline and mobile phones that we say are subscribed to you and that belong to you, we see that there are a number of telephone calls that you made or that were made on your mobile telephone call of a period from 2 p.m. in the afternoon up until 3:57 that afternoon that were made from your landline phone and also from your mobile phone into the mobile phone of Darren Nichols and Jack Womes. I'd like to ask you again, Mr. Steele, could you please tell me the reasons for making any telephone calls that afternoon to Darren Nichols and to Jack Womes? If you didn't make any telephone calls to them, could you please tell me who did? If you weren't in possession of your mobile phone on the afternoon of the 6th of December 95, could you please tell me who was? Darren Nichols, as I've said, tells us that he was working at Heathrow Airport when he received a telephone call from you asking to meet him at Parkinson's shop at Marks Tay. Darren Nichols has told us that as a result of that phone call, which wasn't unusual, he tells us he would do running jobs for you. He would run around for you because he was an associate of yours. That's the sort of thing he says he would ask you to do. Sorry, you would ask him to do. Is that true? He says it arrived at the Parkinson shop in Marks Tay at around about 6 p.m. on Monday the 6th of December 95. You arrived, he says, or you were there in a Hilux motor vehicle. I'm sure that DC Norton can remind us of the number of that. N551B00. I would like to ask one question. It's not quite what we're on about, but I'd like to ask you, because I don't know, what time scale or time span do you have for the murders of the 3 people? Because I don't know. Can you tell me when roughly what time they were murdered? Obviously you may not know exactly, but roughly. Forensically, I believe it's around 7 p.m. Correct. I'm very grateful, thank you very much. That Hilux vehicle is a motor vehicle that I believe you own, Mr. Steele, is that correct? Would you like to tell me anything about that vehicle? How long you've owned it? Who else has access to the vehicle? Who else may have been driving it on the 6th of December 95? And indeed, were you driving that vehicle at around about 6 p.m. when Darren Nichols says he arrived at Parkinson's shop in Marks Tay? Darren Nichols tells us he arrived there and he had a conversation with you, and you said to him words to the effect of, and I can't quote him directly because I'm not in possession of this moment of the transcripts of the interviews that he's had. If they do become available at some stage, obviously subsequently, then I'll be able to put the correct words to you. But until such time, you have to bear with me, Mr. Steele. I hope you understand that. He says that you asked him to drive him because you had a bit of business to do, he says. He says that you tell him that he's got to, that you've got a bit of business to do with that you and Jack Williams had some business to do with Patrick Tate and some others, and that Patrick Tate was of course known to him. Pat Tate was a live larger than life character, wasn't he, from Southend, Basildon area. Darren Nichols tells us that Jack Williams, who was also obviously known to him, arrived at that location in Marks Tay in a B registration VW Passat. I've already asked you about your relationship with Jack Williams, and you've maintained your right to silence. What can you tell me about a B registration VW Passat that Jack Williams was driving? Anything at all that you know about that vehicle? Darren Nichols tells us that he then drove in convoy. He's driving, Jack Williams in the VW Passat. That's Nichols. That's Williams in the VW Passat. Sorry, can you repeat that? That he, Darren Nichols, is driving the Jack Williams Passat? Yes. Sorry, and the next bit then? The next car, sorry? You in your... Sorry, just go over that again for me. Right, I don't want to confuse you on this, yeah? Darren Nichols says that Jack Williams arrived in a VW Passat and that you told Darren Nichols to get out of the vehicle and get into the VW Passat and drive Jack Williams, which he says that you did. You then left, presumably, in your Hilux, unless you had access to another vehicle there. But obviously, that's one of the reasons why I'm asking you the question. If Darren Nichols says that he left his vehicle there, wherever that was in Marks Tay, got out into the VW Passat with Jack Williams and drove away in that, could you tell me how? I mean, what vehicle you drove away from Marks Tay in? Was it NN5 1B00 or was it another vehicle? I just wish to clarify it slightly. It's my understanding that Darren Nichols says that he got into your vehicle and Darren Nichols travelled away from that venue in convoy with Jack Williams in his Passat. That is my understanding of the information that has been given to us. Mr. Steele, my advice to you on that is that the officers have got different versions of that. There is no point in you commenting because if they're unsure, I can't possibly advise you to talk about that, Mr. Steele. So please feel free to remain silent. The reason why I'm sure it's the VW Passat is that having driven away from... Right, we're talking about Marks Tay here, aren't we? I've jumped on a little bit. I'm sorry. It's definitely my mistake. You've drove away together from Marks Tay in your own vehicles and you've driven to the halfway house near Basildon on the A127. That's correct. Actually, can I come in here? It's my fault. I'm getting very confused now because you've confused and if... No. I'm not confused now. I was confused earlier. I'm not confused now. I will go over that section again. Yes, please start again. Please, that's fine. Sure. If we can start from Marks Tay. 6 p.m. at Marks Tay, Darren Nichols tells us that arrives at the shop in Marks Tay, Parkinson's shop in his vehicle, whatever that was. You then turn up in your Hilux, okay? Point 1. He then says that you drove away from there. He is in your vehicle, you're in the Hilux, and you drove in convoy. Drove away in the Hilux together. Correct. Fine, okay, I'll start again. I want to stop this interview, please. Please, you were totally confused. I'm not going any further. 2 seconds together. We need more time, please. I'm not getting at you. If you're confused, you need more time to... you've totally confused me. I'm trying to listen. If you want a break, that's fine. I think not. You need a break to check on the facts. Well, what we can do is explain to you at the moment is that you've explained to me at the moment, I've just heard 3 or 4 different versions of the situation, which I find bizarre. Well, why, hold on a second. Why do we have to stop the interview? Because it's my fault that I've created the confusion. To have the opportunity of this to clear this up. Right, I need the opportunity to clear the confusion up before we break. So that you can be clear of what the evidence is. That's fine, I'm happy about that. Right, so let's just take it slowly for my benefit and for everyone else's here, okay? Right, so forget everything that as I've told you about Mark's Tay, if that's the easy way to do it, ignore it. Start from here, 6 PM at Mark's Tay. Darren Nichols arrives in his vehicle. I don't know what his vehicle is at the moment, okay? You arrive at Mark's Tay in your Hilux. You then leave Mark's Tay in your Hilux in company with Darren Nichols in your vehicle. He has left his vehicle wherever that is at Mark's Tay. Are you clear so far? Thank you, I am, yes. Mr. Steele? Yes. Thank you. He says that you then travelled in your Hilux to the halfway house at Mark's Tay. You left Mark's Tay and you said to Darren, there's Jack, let's go. Jack is not in your vehicle. Jack goes in his own vehicle away from Mark's Tay and you and Darren are in the Hilux. Okay, clear so far? I'd like to clarify, you said and you left Mark's Tay, alright, meaning Mr. Steele, he's in whose car? Well, I haven't confused it, I haven't changed it. He is still in the Hilux with Darren Nichols. And he says, there's Jack, and Jack is in his own vehicle, and both vehicles move away from Mark's Tay. And he's in the Passat, is that right? That's correct. VW Passat, yeah. Are we clear so far? Yes, thank you very much. Do you wish to have a break, or is that clear now? Well, let's cover the halfway house, could we? Right, okay. Right, let's get down to the halfway house, and then if you want, because that is the point that we took it up to when we said there's confusion here. Okay. Travelling en route to the halfway house, Darren Nichols tells us that you said to him that you and Jack Worms had got some business to do with Pat Tate and the others. Some business. They were the words allegedly used. You arrive at the halfway house. Are you familiar with that location, Mr. Steele? The halfway public house on the A127. I advise you not to answer questions, Mr. Steele. At around 6:30 on the evening of the 6th of December 95, you then tell Darren Nichols, he says, to get out of your vehicle, the Hilux, and get into the VW Passat with Jack Worms, and Darren Nichols' instructions, he says, are to drive Jack Worms in that vehicle, the VW Passat. Are we clear so far, Mr. Steele? Mr. Bowen? I'm just reading my notes. Can you give me a second? Sure. Well, I'm not clear. I'll explain to what I'm not quite sure about. You told us that Darren Nichols arrives in his vehicle and my client is supposed to have arrived in his vehicle when they both leave Mark's Tay in the Hilux allegedly together. They're both in that vehicle. Then apparently Darren Nichols says they're going to travel to the halfway house in Mark's Tay. No, that's what my notes say. Halfway house is on the A127. Mark's Tay is on the A12. I know where Mark's Tay is. I don't know where the halfway house is. The halfway house is a public house at the junction of the A128 and the A127. Right, so where did they pick up Jack Worms? Where did they see Jack Worms? They both leave Mark's Tay having seen Jack Worms in his Passat. Both vehicles leave Mark's Tay at the same time. Right, I've got that absolutely clear then. Both vehicles are at the halfway house. Together. Right, I'm clear now. In the light of that clarity, would you like to speak to me, Mr. Steele? Or are you happy for them to carry on their questioning? Carry on, yeah. Thank you. There's no confusion on your part now? No, I think I've got the gist of it. Okay, great. Darren Nichols tells us, when you told him to get out of your vehicle and get into the VW Passat with Jack Worms and drive Jack Worms, that he saw a blue Range Rover coming onto the halfway house. Now that is important, Mr. Steele, because Tony Tucker, Patrick Tate and Craig Rolfe were found murdered in a blue Range Rover. So that's an important point. Darren Nichols says that he gets into the VW Passat with Jack Worms, who then tells him to drive off. So literally, it's a case of you arrive at the halfway house, a blue Range Rover appears, Jack Worms then tells Nichols to drive away from the halfway house. En route from the halfway house, as he drives away, Darren Nichols stops the vehicle at Jack Worms' behest because Jack Worms, Nichols says, tries to affix some false number plates to the VW Passat. But because it's presumably cold on the 6th of December, cold weather, I don't know if you can recall that night, cold, snowing, raining, whatever, snow was on the ground, but couldn't affix the false number plates because the stickiness presumably wouldn't take. Up to that point, Mr. Steele, I have to give you the opportunity to make comment on anything that I've put to you. It is your opportunity to tell me whether the events I've described happened. If they happened in the way that Darren Nichols says they did, or perhaps they didn't at all, it's your opportunity to tell me. Is there any comment that you'd like to make about what I've said to you so far, going from the afternoon of the 6th of December 95? Mr. Steele, we're learning new facts all the time, and we've had some difficulty at this interview and some confusion, which now I'm satisfied has been resolved. However, again, I advise you not to say anything. If we're to take further instructions when we're given proper information, then of course we will review our position. But at the moment, we're learning new facts all the time, and it's very, very difficult, and it's onerous in fact on you to be given an opportunity to comment on a part of a story. If we're given the full facts, then my advice to you may change, but at the moment I must remind you of my advice, and that advice is crystal clear. Please remain silent, because I do not have the full information to allow me to give you advice as to the strength of the police evidence. I'm sure there is more information to come, and if we are to start commenting now, we might prejudice our position. Please remain silent. Thank you, officers. Darren Nichols is told, he says, by Worms to drive along the A130 from the direction of the 127, and he says that they come to a roundabout called locally, or known locally, as the Rettendon Turnpike. Are you familiar with the particular location, Mr. Steele? Jack Worms then tells Nichols once he's negotiated the Rettendon Turnpike, bearing in mind that Nichols is saying that he's travelling towards Chelmsford on the A130. Worms tells him to stop. He tells Nichols to drop him off at a location which we say, and Darren Nichols says is in the area of the lane at Rettendon, where subsequently the blue Range Rover containing the bodies of Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe were found. Nichols says that Jack Worms told him to drive off, and that when he is contacted by phone by Jack Worms, Nichols is to return and collect him from that location, vis-a-vis the end of the lane at Rettendon. Nichols says at the time when he dropped off Jack Worms off into the area of the lane at Rettendon, Jack Worms was wearing a blue boiler suit. He also says at some stage, and he can't be sure whether it's just now or whether it's when he collects Jack Worms later, which I'll go on to, that Jack Worms is wearing a pair of surgical gloves similar to the type that police would wear when searching a premises. He says that when Worms got out of the vehicle, the VW Passat, he was carrying a plumber's bag, how Nichols describes it. Nichols says he then drives off, and about 5 minutes later receives a telephone call on his mobile phone from Jack Worms asking him to return to the lane to collect him. He says that he did that. He returned to the lane where Jack Worms got into the back of the VW Passat carrying the same bag, the plumber's bag. Nichols says that Jack Worms said to him words to the effect, "Mickey will be along in a minute, he's looking for something." Darren Nichols says that he then sees you appear from the lane and that you got into the front of the vehicle, the VW Passat, and that you was also wearing overalls and Wellington boots. Did that event, or those events that I've described to you, occur, Mr. Steele? I've been given information, Mr. Steele, from somebody who's apparently is in police custody. I have no way of knowing if that's exactly what's taken place. The officers is telling us this information now. This is very important information which hasn't been given to us all the way along the line. I must advise you, in the light of the police conduct of this investigation, to remain silent. It's not fair in the interest of justice for them to put to you information as important as this at this late stage. Please remain silent, and that is conduct I advise you to continue throughout the rest of this investigation, because you are not being given a fair opportunity of addressing these absolutely vital points involved in a triple murder. Any court that hears this interview will realise that you're not being treated fairly by these officers. I am being misled information is being withheld and it's not fair to me, and Mr. Steele, is certainly not fair to you. I'll continue, Mr. Steele. Darren Nichols says that you appeared from the lane and you were carrying a bag, which he says that once you got into the vehicle, he sees contains what he describes as a side-by-side shotgun. I have to point out to you, of course, that the tape here as always is the witness. And of course, what I'm telling you here is what has been relayed to me as to what Darren Nichols has recounted to colleagues that are interviewing him. All I can say, Mr. Steele, is I wonder why the police haven't told me this information before. They're withholding information from me. I don't know that the reason is one that one can guess at this stage, and again, please remain silent, because you have nothing to gain at this point from answering police questions. The police know the position as far as I'm concerned. I've made it perfectly clear that we will take further instructions if they give us the full information. They haven't done that, Mr. Steele. I do not know why. I'll let them continue, but please remain silent. Feel free to remain silent as you have done, Mr. Steele. Darren Nichols then says at some stage after you got back into the VW Passat, bearing in mind that he's in the vehicle, he says with Jack Worms and yourself that your words again to the effect of, well, that sorted them out. We won't be hearing any more of them. For the benefit of the tape, Mr. Steele smiled wearily and raised his eyebrows. I don't see what the officer said that for, Mr. Steele. I don't know what evidential benefit any reactions you make to information that they're giving to you. I'm highly surprised that you've made a reaction given the important information they're giving to you. They've seen fit not to give us that information before, and I don't see any benefit to the officers of them describing your reaction at the present time. Darren Nichols tells us you then drove in the VW Passat back over the Rettendon Turnpike in the direction of the 127, and then he drove into Raywith in Raywith Lane. In fact, another location that's familiar to Mr. Steele. It's not familiar to me. It's not been mentioned to me before. And then he drove to a public house in Rayleigh, which is near the railway station in Rayleigh, called the Traveller's Joy, as he described it well. From my local knowledge now, I think that's a pub that's now called the Hungry Horse. It's a public house directly by the railway station at Rayleigh. Is that location familiar to you? It's not familiar to me either. It's not been mentioned to me beforehand either, officers. He says that upon arrival in the car park of that public house, he saw that your Hilux vehicle was in the car park and it was directed by you to park close to that vehicle. And he says that you got out the VW Passat and got off. Sorry, took off your overalls and walked away from the VW Passat. Mr. Nichols also tells us that at some stage he's had a further conversation with you. I'm not in a position yet to say exactly when this conversation was. And you're not in a position to say when it happened. Perhaps you'll leave that to later on until you do know. The conversation was to the effect that he says that you said to him that Jack Worms was in the bushes down the lane, and as you got out the Range Rover, we said that the Range Rover containing Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe, Worms stepped out of the bushes, hands you a gun, which we obviously say is the side-by-side shotgun, and that Jack Worms shot Tony Tucker, Craig Rolfe and Pat Tate while they were sitting in the Range Rover, and that you told Darren Nichols that you saw one of them twitch, and that you then shot one of them, who we say, is that Pat Tate? Is Pat Tate in the head? You shot him, Mr. Steele. With what weapons, officers? The shot, well, presumably the shotgun that you then came back carrying out of the lane. The side-by-side. So that there's two guns then. Jack Worms has got one, and my client's. Correct, yes. Darren Nichols tells us that it's his knowledge that Jack Worms has been responsible for the destruction of the guns. They've been ground down and that they've been disposed of. And that following the events of that evening, you then took Darren Nichols back to Marks Tay, where he collected his vehicle. That's the reason why, Mr. Steele, you're with us here, having been arrested on suspicion of the murder of Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe. Considering the length of the time that you've been sitting here, Mr. Steele, it's nice of the officers to here now give you the opportunity of knowing what evidence they do have, and they're trying to surprise you with this interview. And I think that the reason they've held back this information so they can take you by surprise, which isn't in the interest of justice, considering the new caution which came into effect on the 4th 95. What they're doing now is totally unfair in the interest of justice, and I object the manner in which we've been dealt with very, very strongly indeed. What I'd like to do, Mr. Steele, is continue with the interview just for a moment, is just to point out to you that the inquiries into the mobile phones that we say belong to you and the other people that we've mentioned show that going from the afternoon of the 6th of December in towards the early evening, that of 16:39 hours, there's a telephone call on a mobile phone that we say belongs to Darren Nichols, to a mobile phone that we say belongs to you. At 17:12 hours that afternoon, there was a telephone call from a mobile phone we say belonged to Jack Worms to a mobile phone we say belonged to you. At 16:03, there was a telephone call from a mobile phone we say belonged to you to a mobile phone we say belonged to Jack Worms. At 18:09, there was a telephone call from a mobile phone we say belongs to you to a mobile phone that we say belonged to Jack Worms. Is there anything you'd like to say to me about the content of these telephone calls that were made on that afternoon? Mr. Steele, I have seen no evidence of these telephone calls that have been mentioned beforehand. Please do not comment, because I don't know if these records exist at the present stage. I haven't been shown them, so they may not exist, but I cannot confirm they do because I haven't seen them been shown. At 18:44, Mr. Steele, there was a telephone call made by Sarah Saunders, a name which we've discussed before. She telephoned Patrick Tate, and she tells us that Patrick Tate replied to her, "I cannot talk at the moment, I am with somebody." Was he with you, Mr. Steele, at 18:44 on the 6th of December? Was that to a mobile phone that Tate had? Yes. Thank you. I advise you not to answer that question, Mr. Steele. At 18:59, there was a telephone call from Jack Worms' mobile, a phone that we say was in his possession, to a mobile phone belonging to Darren Nichols. And we obviously say that is the telephone call where Jack Worms is telling Darren Nichols to come and collect me from the end of the lane. At 20:20 hours that evening, there was a telephone call from your home address to a mobile phone that we say belongs to Jack Worms. And at 18:39, there was a further telephone call from a landline belonging to your home address to a mobile phone that we say belongs to Jack Worms. Did you shoot Mr. Steele, Tony Tucker, Craig Rolfe and Patrick Tate on the evening of the 6th of December 95? Do you have any knowledge of the shootings of these three men? Is there any information that you can give us at this stage with regard to how these three men were murdered on that evening? It is my intention to conclude the interview now to allow you to have a private consultation with your solicitor, obviously to discuss what we've been saying to you throughout this interview. Therefore, it is my intention to conclude the interview. The time on my watch now is 12 hours and the interview is concluded. This interview has been tape recorded at Colchester Police Station. I am Philip Norton, a detective constable from the Central Detective Unit at Chelmsford. The date is Friday the 17th of the 5th, 96. The time is now 16:08 hours. I'm here to interview Michael Steele. Michael, just give your full name and address and date of birth, please. I'm Michael John Steele, Colchester. My date of birth is the 13th of the 1242. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you fail to mention something when questioned, which you later rely on in court. Anything you say may be given in evidence. Do you understand that? Yes. Your right to continue, Michael. The right to seek legal advice free at any stage. Do you understand that? Yes. You've had a few hours now rest since the last interviews. Are you happy to be interviewed at this stage? Yes. And I believe you've been in with the solicitor now for the last hour and 45 minutes. Could you confirm that? I couldn't confirm the actual time because I haven't been looking at my watch. Okay, it's about approximate. I wouldn't like to. It would surprise me if we have been here for an hour and 45 minutes. It would surprise me. I don't want to be picky on the time, but it's over an hour and a half. The other police officer in the room is DC Shakespeare, Essex Police Central Detective Unit based at Chelmsford headquarters, and Mr. Bowen. I'm Christopher Bowen, a solicitor with Jeeps & Sons here in Colchester. I'm now going to explain my role once again is to advise Mr. Steele throughout the interview. Since the last two interviews, or since the last interview should I say, I've received no further disclosure from the police. As a result, my client intends to exercise his right to silence at this interview. I must say again, and re-emphasise for the benefit of the tape, which will be listened to during court proceedings at a later stage, my client has totally lost confidence with the police investigation. Continually, the defence has asked for proper disclosure, given the extreme seriousness of the allegations against Mr. Steele. Our request has met with deaf ears. It's plain from the second interview today that the police do have detailed information that they could give to the defence in advance of the interviews. They chose not to do so. Accordingly, the defence made the necessary representations and continued to make the necessary representations and followed legal advice. Mr. Steele, as I've already said already, will exercise his right of silence at this interview also and at further interviews until proper disclosure is given to us when matters can be reconsidered. Before the start of this interview, I say again, no further disclosure has been offered. As a result, I have advised Mr. Steele personally that he should answer no questions. I see no good reason why proper disclosure has not been given to the defence. In the interest of justice, given the seriousness of these allegations, the defence should have made aware the strength of the evidence. At the present time, even though certain matters have now come to light, we're still not aware of the full strength of the evidence. The defence has been misled in this case and information has been withheld accordingly. As a direct result of the disingenuous police approach, my client will answer no questions. I ask you to respect this decision. One final thing I want to say, during the second interview we had today, it's right to say there was some confusion amongst the investigating officers regarding evidence against Mr. Steele. All I can say is if the investigating officers have had confusion, it is even harder for the defence to make an accurate assessment of the strength of the evidence, and again, that's another reason why my client will exercise his right to silence. If the prosecution, the police officers have difficulties with confusion, well, it makes my job terribly difficult, Mr. Steele's job an impossible task. Again, I'm sorry I've had to go into this at such length, but it's absolutely necessary if I'm to properly represent my client's interests. I thank you for your patience, and now let you begin to ask your questions again. Michael, we do intend to continue asking questions, pointing out the evidence in the case and pointing out the circumstances of the police inquiry, and I will continue to do that during this interview. The police feel that they've given you what we consider to be the fullest appropriate information at every stage during this inquiry, and now we wish to give you a further opportunity of giving your account of the incidences surrounding this inquiry leading to your arrest, and all the incidences in relation to the allegations that have been made against you. Are you happy for me to continue this interview at this stage? Mr. Steele is going to answer no questions, but we appreciate that you have a right to ask questions, and we will remain at this interview as long as you have reasonable questions to ask. All I've got to say about the police view that appropriate disclosure has been given, that I totally disagree with that. A one-page summary is wholly insufficient given the fact you're investigating at least one importation of drugs, possibly more, and a triple murder, which has received much coverage in the newspaper since the murder happened last December. We've asked continuously for information, it's not been given to us, and we dispute what the police say. I just want to make that clear, but please do begin asking questions. Right, okay. As I pointed out at the beginning of this interview, you've now had an hour and a half with your solicitor, you've had a break for lunch, prior to that you've had an interview with us, and prior to that a first interview of the day, and between those interviews you've had a chance to consult with your solicitor. Would you accept that? We say that at all times during this inquiry you have been given access to your legal advisor at your request. That has never been denied to you, and in fact we have the right to deny you that, and that's been made available to you at every stage, and your solicitor has been very prompt in his attendance at this police station at every time that has been indicated to him that he should do so. So I must point out to you, Michael, where we stand at the moment in relation to these interviews. As you know, and as you've been advised by your legal advisor, the situation in relation to the caution of suspects at the police station during police interviews changed. Under Section 34 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994, the words not only of the caution changed, but the circumstances in which it should be given and what happens to interviews after those cautions are given had dramatically changed. The Crown Court judge now has the opportunity of directing a jury in a Crown Court trial in relation to any interference that he believes the jury could be fairly air to consider in certain circumstances during any court trial. These interviews may form part of the court trial at some subsequent date, and therefore any silence or no comments given during the police interviews can be, in certain circumstances, be used by the Crown Court judge to ask the jury to consider certain interferences. Do you understand that? Okay. As I say to you, the police feel that as it was deemed necessary, certain facts have been disclosed to your solicitor in order that it can advise you and seek your advice during the times that you've had with him. We took the unusual steps of even preparing a written summary to give him prior to your first interview to assist in that procedure. We have constantly been bombarded by your solicitor in relation to the conduct of these interviews. We at all times have attempted to be reasonable and seek justice in this case and have a duty to put questions to you on behalf of the public. And we have a duty to seek out the truth. That's all we intend to do and all we are attempting to do. I must make this clear before we start. Now, if you have no observations, I intend to continue this interview as we've done on the previous interviews, pointing out to you certain new things that will not be known to your solicitor at this stage. Are you happy for the interview to continue, Mr. Bowen? My client doesn't wish to be here. The custody record, which will be able to be looked at in future court hearings, will bear that out. We made representations that Mr. Steele doesn't want to be here. He wants to be back at the magistrate's court and not here. He doesn't want to take part in any further interviews. We made that clear in his first interview after he was remanded into local custody. He's going to sit here and say nothing. It's not a case of is he happy to be interviewed. If he wasn't going to be interviewed in this particular interview room, I can confirm it. Superintendent Story told me this morning during a telephone call that recording equipment will be taken into his cell. That's correct. So whatever. I'm grateful for you answering that with the affirmative. Whatever he feels is not going to make any difference at all. He doesn't want to be interviewed. He's not happy being here. He's not happy at the way that the police inquiry has been run. I don't want to say that the police inquiry has been run by you officers. It's been run by more senior officers. It's the approach taken, an investigation that we object. Now, as far as one of the things you've said is this, that you've taken the unusual step of providing a briefing note. I agree that briefing notes aren't usually given, but I've been provided with more disclosure by police in a domestic burglary than I have in this case. PCs, ordinary PCs, you've more senior officers provide me nowadays since the change in the police caution in April 1995. Provide me with detailed statements that have been given. I find it incredible that given the absolute seriousness of these offences, and let us not underestimate the seriousness, I can assure you. I know how much money's been spent. I guess how much money's been spent on this police inquiry. The police take it very, very seriously. Given that seriousness, I find it beyond belief that the only information I've been given is a one-page A4 sheet of typed information. No statements, nothing. And that information has been brought up in this interview, which my question to you was, with respect, and time is cracking on, if we could continue with this interview. Yes, please do. But I just want you to be aware he's not happy at being here. We don't want to be here, and he's not going to answer any questions, but we understand you have a right to ask, and I hope you appreciate that I respect that. And I can now continue. Please do. Thank you very much. Right. I've taken time to explain to you, Michael, the situation as we regard it. I would invite you now that after some lengthy interviews and after you've been given a substantial amount of information on the previous interviews, is there any comment that you wish to make in relation to anything that has been said to you by the police officers at this time? If there's any lawful reason that you can tell us in relation to any of these activities that we've suggested to you that were illegal, that you can give us, then this is your opportunity. We allege that you was involved with others in what we describe as the bad cannabis conspiracy, a conspiracy to import controlled drugs into this country between the 1st of November to the 21st of November 1995. Were you involved in that conspiracy? Did you arrange the murder of Patrick Tate, Anthony Tucker and Craig Rolfe? Were you present during their deaths? I'll move on from there and state that on the 9th of the 11th 95, Patrick Tate was released from custody at Southend Police Station after being arrested after an incident involving Tony Tucker's Porsche motor vehicle. Patrick Tate on release used the mobile phone of Craig Rolfe to phone your home address. At that time, can you confirm to me that you was in custody with Customs and Excise and been arrested earlier that morning in relation to your boat being seen on the beach at Felixstowe? Is that correct? Are you aware of a phone call that Mr. Tate made to your home address while she was in custody? Who would have been present at your house at that time? Has any other person, apart from Jackie Street, got control of your premises? On the 6th of the 12th, 95, in confirmation of Darren Nichols' evidence that a phone call was made from the little chef at the halfway house on the A127 to Patrick Tate's mobile phone, I turned to the information of Donna Jaggers. I confirmed Donna Jaggers is not a name I've heard. It's not a name you've heard before? Thank you. Donna Jaggers is the girlfriend of Craig Rolfe. She has a daughter by him. She states she's informed police of her relationship with Craig Rolfe and subsequently Anthony Tucker and the relationship between the three of them. Are you aware of who Donna Jaggers is? Have you met her before? She knows you. She knows you as Mickey the pilot, otherwise known as Mickey Steele. Would you agree you're known as Mickey the pilot and you have a pilot's license? She describes you attending Longwood riding stables in Basildon driving your RAV4 motor vehicle, the Toyota, where you meet Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe. You hand a bag to Anthony Tucker, is that correct? The bag was taken away by Jaggers and Rolfe, and Jaggers would say that later she discovered the cannabis resin bars were in that bag. Did you hand that cannabis resin to Tony Tucker in that bag? Were you concerned in the supply of the cannabis to them? She will say that in November 95, £60,000 was put together in relation to a cannabis importation in which you had organised with them to import into this country using your boat. Craig Rolfe had gathered £7,000 together. He took that to the house of Tony Tucker in Fobbing. On leaving Tony Tucker's premises, where the money had been handed over, Donna Jaggers sees you coming up the path towards the address. She recognised you. She knows you. Would you accept that? Have you any comments to make in relation to that? And she is aware that 2 days after that you was arrested on the beach by the customs, which would indicate that that meeting took place around the date on the 6th of November 95. She can also confirm that Patrick Tate was arrested and will say in evidence that at 1800 hours the same day she went with Rolfe to Southend Police Station and picked Tate up. She will say that he used Craig Rolfe's mobile telephone to phone your home address. Are you aware of that telephone call? Have you been informed of its contents? The phone call was in relation to the cannabis resin, and on completion of the phone call, she will say that he was happy due to the fact that cannabis resin was secure and safe, intimating that it had not been recovered by the authorities. Is it true there's a statement signed? Sorry to interrupt at this point. Is it true there's a statement from this lady, Donna Jaggers? There is a statement in relation to her evidence, yes. Do you know any reason why Superintendent Story won't disclose that to me? I'm not prepared to discuss that at this time. Okay, thank you. But it hasn't been disclosed to you. You can confirm that, thank you. My question is to you, have you been aware of the substance of the phone call? And the question would be, who was at your house to receive that call and have the knowledge to inform Patrick Tate that the cannabis resin was secure? Can you answer those questions? She will say that Rolfe took his share of the cannabis resin to another supplier in the Golders Green area of London, but soon after was receiving calls in relation to its poor quality. She will confirm that Tate, Tucker and Rolfe became agitated at this. Can you confirm not only that you supplied them with the poor cannabis, but upped the price at the same time, increasing your share of the profits? Can you confirm they began to put pressure on you to take the cannabis back? Can you describe the pressure that they put you under, and in what form did it take? She will say that you subsequently relented and agreed to take the cannabis back in order that a refund could be arranged with the people that you received the cannabis from in the first place. The bars of cannabis that were returned to you were broken by Patrick Tate. She will say that on the 17th of 11th 95, Barry Dorman, Pat Tate, Craig Rolfe, Barry Dorman's wife and 3 girls travelled to Ostend. She did not travel that time due to the fact she knew what was occurring and why they were travelling, that they were going to receive money back from you. She will say that on the return she was made aware that you had begun a further conspiracy to organise 30 kilos of cocaine being imported into this country, and that you also entered into a conspiracy with those persons to rob, I think that's the expression, the people that you were getting the drugs from. Can you confirm this is what you were doing at the time, entering into a further conspiracy, and in fact, Your part in that was to land the drugs by plane at an airstrip in the south of Essex. She will say that as far as she is aware, Tate and Tucker planned to trick you in relation to the cocaine. Are you aware of that? Are you aware of any plot by them to have you over? To cut your cocaine 3 kilos to 7 of impure. Were you made aware of that fact? She will say on the 6th of December, the day of the murder, she received a phone call from Craig stating that you'd made contact with Tucker and that all three, Craig Rolfe, Patrick Tate and Tony Tucker, are going to meet you later on that evening. She was in fact dropped by Lakeside by Craig in the Range Rover at 17:45 that day. He was going to pick up Tate and Tucker and they planned to come and meet you. Is there anything you'd like to say in relation to the information laid before you now from Donna Jaggers? All I'd like to say is that again, my client isn't going to answer any questions. I cannot understand why the police, if they have this information, have not given this to us previously. We have asked for it time and time again. We're showing a reasonable approach to these interviews. I cannot stress enough the seriousness of these allegations against my client. How can the defence be expected to appraise themselves of the strength of the evidence if it's being thrown at the defence at these interviews? My client will continue to remain silent. I appreciate that decisions of disclosure do not apparently seem to be made by you officers, so I'll make it plain that I'm not complaining that you're not showing me the information. I appreciate your acting on instructions from your senior officers, but I cannot understand why Superintendent Story won't make disclosure to me when I've asked for it time and time again through you. I've asked you for it directly from him. He won't give it to me. Plainly, there's information here, but it's not being given to the defence in this correct manner. The interests of justice are not being served by this. My client will continue to remain silent, and I do not believe that any court will draw any interference adverse to my client's interest. Thank you. We continue. Yesterday during interview, you read out a prepared statement that you prepared in your own handwriting. Would you agree with that? I confirm for the benefit, because my client won't say anything, the prepared statement was read out by him, yes. Within that, you accepted knowledge of the deceased person, Patrick Tate, Anthony Tucker, and Craig Rolfe. Would you accept that? I'll accept it on his behalf. He's going to say nothing at all. But you will accept he said that. I will accept that was mentioned in his prepared statement. And through your interviews and through the prepared statement, accept that ownership and control of both premises at Anglers Green and Meadow Cottage, London Road, Clacton. Would you accept that? I want to say nothing more. I don't want to answer on behalf of him. I think I've said too much already. Well, you've started to... I'm not answering questions for him. Okay. In that prepared statement, you state that the shotgun at Meadow Cottage would be found not to be the murder weapon. Would you accept that? I would state that can be seen as you accepting that you knew the shotgun was at Meadow Cottage, that you had control of it in your premises, and the fact that you state it was not used in the murder could imply that you had some knowledge about the movement of that weapon, or had some knowledge, and in fact, we say you were present at the time that the 3 persons were shot dead. Is there any comment you'd like to make in relation to that? These are not issues you can be unclear of, and are not issues that have raised their heads during this interview. That has come from you. Is there anything you'd like to say in relation to these observations in relation to what you've said in your prepared statement? I advise you not to answer that question. Your prepared statement was very clear, Mr. Steele, for a court to make any observations on it now. For you to make anything at this stage, you've made yourself clear in my view. I just wanted to further the point with regard to this interferences really, Mr. Steele, so that you're totally clear what the position is as far as we're concerned. Your solicitor, Mr. Bowen, has, we've heard on a number of occasions, has made representations during the course of these interviews and has complained that not enough details of evidence against you has been disclosed. You should be perfectly clear on that point. You are aware, of course, this is not for us, myself and DC Norton at this stage to decide what information may or may not be evidence at a later date. We would like to re-emphasise the fact that you, Mr. Steele, are entitled, and indeed it is your right now that you've heard specific details of your alleged involvement for us in the conspiracy to import controlled drugs and your alleged involvement in the murder of Pat Tate, Craig Rolfe and Tony Tucker. to have the opportunity to make any comment whatsoever that you may wish. If you are an innocent man, Mr. Steele, I urge you now to tell us your side of the story. If you have any explanation at all, having heard the weight of these accusations that have been made against you, you can now tell us in order so that we can investigate your version of these events. I'm turning to you, Mr. Bowen. I would be grateful if you would confirm the bail application that you made at Chelmsford Magistrates Court on Wednesday the 15th of the 5th this week. You made your position clear in so as you've said that there is no point in remanding Mr. Steele to a police station as he would not be answering any questions that were put to him by the police. I have no comments to make. This interview is not for me to answer any questions. I'm not going to make any observations about anything I've done in my professional duty. I'm not being interviewed here. I will not answer any of your questions you put to me of that nature. I don't wish to do so. There is no obligation for me to make any answers. I'm not the person being interviewed. I'm a solicitor. I'd just like to make the point for Mr. Steele's benefit and for ours that these comments you've made in the Magistrates Court at that hearing were obviously made before any details of any disclosure were given to you. You have made your stance perfectly clear, even at that stage. We have one last observation I wish to make before I move on, Mr. Steele, is that on the 22nd of the 12th, 95, the funeral of Patrick Tate was held at Pitsea. Can you give the date of that again? Sorry, I missed it. 22nd of the 12th, 95. Thank you. Were you present at that funeral? Was your wife, your common law wife, Jackie Street, present at that funeral? Did you inform her to tell other persons present at that time to tell people that you were not attending the funeral due to the fact you were answering bail to an allegation that Customs and Excise were making at that time? Did you tell her to say that? Were you aware that she said that? I'm going to conclude the interview there, Mr. Steele, only for a short break, which we wish to inform your legal representation of certain facts that we'll be putting to you in a further interview. Interview concludes 16:42. This interview is being tape recorded. I'm Detective Constable 842 Shakespeare at the Essex Police stationed at the Central Detective Unit at Police Headquarters. We're at an interview room at Colchester Police Station. The time on my watch is now 21 hours and it's Friday the 17th of the 5th, 96. We are here to interview Michael John Steele. If you could just introduce yourself, Mr. Steele, to the tape, please. Michael John Steele, Oaklands, Anglers Green, Colchester. My date of birth is the 13th of the 12th, 42. There is another officer present, Philip Norton, Detective Constable. Thank you. I just remind Mr. Steele, as you're fully aware, that you're under caution whereby you do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something that you later rely on in court, and anything you do say may be given in evidence. I'd like to point out to you that your legal representation, of course, is present in the interview room, and I'll ask him to introduce himself in one moment. I'd also like to point out that you are entitled to free independent legal advice at any stage, and anything you're not happy with, anything you want to discuss at any stage in this interview, you are perfectly entitled to ask us to stop the interview so that you can have a chance for a private consultation with your solicitor. Okay, also present in the room is your solicitor. Thank you very much, DC Shakespeare. I'm Christopher Bowen, a solicitor with Jeeps & Son based here in Colchester. I'm now required to explain my role once again at this interview is to advise my client and to look after his basic legal rights. I confirm that we've had a briefing, not based on the original briefing note that I've received, but nevertheless we've had a brief briefing. The original single-page briefing sheet, as I've said, doesn't cover the matters to be discussed at this interview. It appears from the briefing that I've received from DC Shakespeare and DC Norton, that's the importation alleged to have taken place. That's the importation of controlled drugs between the 25th of the 3rd, 96 and the 16th of the 4th, 96 is not supported by any evidence. I've requested further information and any evidence for the allegation, but this hasn't been forthcoming. I do understand that the officers in the room are taking instructions from the officers more senior of them. Again, I wish that the senior officers would be prepared to give us more disclosure. Again, I invite the officer to consider further disclosures so I can take further instructions from my client. There is apparently a tape recording of an undercover police officer with someone called Mickey relevant to this interview. I would have liked to have listened to the tape recording before this interview. I understand it can only be listened in the interview situation. Before we've come in, I've asked if we could listen to it, and I know officers that you've been told by your senior officer that the tape recording can only be played if we can guarantee in advance of the tape recording being played that my client is going to make a comment. Unfortunately, my position on this is very clear. I'm unable to inform you prior to listening to the tape recording myself as to whether my client would be prepared to make any comment or not. I simply cannot take his instructions at this point on matters that I have not heard. This is another example of the lack of disclosure by the police investigating these extremely serious offences. When the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994 came into force, the police received an advantage not previously at their disposal. Section 34 of the Act meant that a court may draw interference from a defendant's silence. The Act says such interferences may be drawn from the failure as appear proper. In order for an advance interference to be drawn against my client, one of the material issues has to be the level of police disclosure. My client is in police custody for some of the most serious offences imaginable. Matters to be discussed at this interview were not, as I've already said, mentioned on the original briefing sheet. Information given to me by the police suggests that the police have information regarding an importation of cannabis. No evidence, as I've said, has been produced to justify this. As a result, as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Steele's solicitor, I'm unable properly to assess the strength of the police evidence. Effectively, I'm having to work with my hands tied behind my back without an ability to consider evidence in detail. Again, as in previous interviews, I can only advise my client to exercise his right of silence. At present, no information is available regarding the content of the telephone call. I would like to listen to the content of that tape. I would like to listen to the content of that tape recording because at present, I have no understanding as to the relevance of this information to the current offences which you wish to discuss. It may assist us if the tape is to be played. I invite you at this point to consider allowing us to have the tape played at this interview. We would like to hear it, then after we'd been able to listen to it, I will be able to take further instructions from my client. If the case is I'm not able to listen to it, given that I cannot give assurances in advance of listening to it, my client will definitely comment. I cannot possibly give any guarantees. Finally, during all consultations with the police, I feel I've been deliberately left in the dark regarding the vast amount of evidence the police claim to have. To date, none of the 300 odd statements that I've been told are in existence on 2 databases have been shown to me. I can only surmise the reason for this. Once again, this is very late in the 3-day lay down my client has had to go through. I invite the police to make full disclosure to the defence of all the evidence which is relevant for me to advise my client properly. Now I've given that particular information at several other interviews. I mean the words I say. I invite the police to give the defence full disclosure. At the present time, I have no disclosure whatsoever to speak from apart from a couple of paragraphs regarding allegations. That's all I have. I cannot advise my client to do anything other than to exercise his right to silence. Thank you very much for your great patience that you've had with me during today and all the other days that we've had. You've allowed me without interruption to give my legal advice on tape. I'm grateful, and now I'm going to let you begin the interview. Please, DC Shakespeare, I may allow you to continue now, but please respect my client's decision to remain silent. Obviously, just in relation to that statement that you've made that I must just reply, and I must say for the benefit of the tape that the following applies. We have given what we consider to be the fullest appropriate information at this stage, and we now wish to give the client the opportunity of giving his account of the incident. Mr. Steele, I'd like to ask you questions now, not immediately in relation to the immediate importation that I arrested you for at the end of the last interview. We're just covering 1 or 2 points over matters that we've covered in our previous interviews, if I may. First of all, in the previous interview, I was talking to you about a trip that Darren Nichols says that he made with you. He says in the summer or the autumn time of 1995 last year. If you recall, and I remind you that Darren Nichols tells us that he travelled for the day to Holland, he says with you, is there anything you'd like to tell me about the alleged day trip to Holland in company with Darren Nichols? Mr. Steele, we again haven't been given any evidence about this. Look at any statements or transcripts of interviews. I can only say to you at this point, as your legal advisor, I advise you to remain silent. Just to refresh your memory, Mr. Steele, that Darren Nichols tells us that at the time, on the day trip to Holland, he had a Golf convertible motor vehicle. Whether or not that may ring any bells with you, I don't know. And he tells us that on the day in question, you travelled over to Holland with a man by the name of Peter, who we obviously say is an associate of yours, Peter Corey, a name we've obviously heard in previous interviews. Just to remind you that Darren Nichols says that you went to Stone's Cafe in Amsterdam, which is a cafe owned by the Stones brothers, and that you had a meeting on that day in question with a man by the name of John Stone. Can you tell me what the purposes of that meeting was in Amsterdam on that day? Can you tell me whether you know a man by the name of John Stone, or indeed whether you know the premises by the name of Stone's Cafe in Amsterdam? He says, Darren Nichols, that is, that you travelled to Amsterdam via the Channel Tunnel, where following this meeting you returned later that day on a lengthy trip, but it was completed, he says, over a day's sort of period. Is there any legitimate reason, Mr. Steele, you can tell me why you travelled over to Amsterdam on that occasion with Mr. Nichols? Obviously, we say to you that we think the reason that you went to Amsterdam on that occasion was to perhaps to arrange a subsequent importation, which that in fact was the case. I'll then go on to remind you about a matter that we discussed in the previous interview that again, based upon what Darren Nichols has told us, if you remember, he said that about a month after he went on that trip with you, he spoke to you and you asked him to deliver the sum of £80,000 in cash over to Amsterdam as payment for a consignment. Darren Nichols tells us that you paid him £2,000 or offered to pay him £2,000 for the trip. Is there any comment you'd like to make with regard to the allegation? Darren Nichols tells us that he travelled to the continent in company with Peter, taking out the sum of £80,000 he said that was given to him in a holdall. He tells us that in Amsterdam there was a meeting between Peter and again this John Stone man, who we say is obviously your contact over in Amsterdam, or one of your contacts anyway. Darren Nichols then tells us that he was responsible to hire a car out of Amsterdam and that the cannabis, which was on this occasion was grass, was put in the boot of the vehicle, where he then drove it in the company with Peter to Ostend, where he says the drugs were placed onto a beach. Have you any knowledge at all about what Darren Nichols is saying with regard to that matter? Is there any comment that you would like to make to us regard to the allegation that you was involved in that matter? Sorry, officer, Mr. Steele, this information that is not backed up by evidence as far as I can see at the moment. Obviously, you're aware I'm acting in the dark somewhat. I can only say to you that you should remain silent because there's no evidence on which I can properly advise you as to whether you should answer that particular question. Thank you, DC Shakespeare. Darren Nichols then is, he says, waiting on the beach or near the beach in Ostend when he says he hears the noise of a boat. It's obviously dark, it's late at night, but that Peter is in possession of a two-way radio, he says, and that there's some sort of a call signal that's going on this two-way radio. But he tells us that as far as he is concerned, it was his voice. Sorry, your voice that he heard on the radio as this boat comes in towards the shore and obviously we say makes the collection of the drugs, which is then put into the boat and the boat moves away from the beach. Was that you in that particular boat on that particular occasion, Mr. Steele? Is it the case that you travelled out from this country in a boat, whether it be a rib inflatable dinghy that we've heard about on previous interviews, or perhaps another boat that you have access to? Is there any comment you would like to make about this allegation about your involvement in that particular matter? Darren Nichols tells us when he returned to the UK subsequent to that particular incident that you paid him not the money that was promised but a kilo of the herbal cannabis. Mr. Steele, we've mentioned in previous interviews about payments made with the use of your Barclaycard. If you remember, we asked the questions in relation to a bill that was paid at the Burlington Hotel in Ostend by the use of that Barclaycard. Our inquiries have shown us that that Barclaycard was used on the 6th of the 12th, 95 to pay the sum of £206.95 to Transair. I asked you before to indicate who who has access to your Barclaycard, and I will specifically ask you on this occasion the sum of £206.95 to Transair on the 6th of the 12th 95. What does that relate to that particular transaction? Could you help me out? On the 20th of the 12th 95, your Barclaycard was used to pay a further bill of £206.95 to the same company or business or whatever it may be, Transair. Can you help me out with any information about that particular transaction, Mr. Steele, on the 20th of the 12th 95? Well, both of these transactions that I've mentioned are legitimate transactions for something that you bought or paid for in connection with a business, your business, holiday, anything. Is there anything that you can tell us to help us out with our inquiries to prove or disprove the legitimacy of that particular transaction? Mr. Steele, it is the police's job to work out what's legitimate or illegitimate, so I would advise you not to answer that question. Moving on to the 5th of the 1st 96, our inquiries have revealed that you were seen at the Clacton Launch Slip car park in the Hilux, where your headlamps were facing out to sea for 15 minutes. They were turned off for 10 minutes and then back on for 15 minutes. Can you recall anything about that particular incident? I'm very sorry, I missed the date in January. Sorry, the 5th of the 1st 96. Thank you. At 1900 hours, on the 5th of the 1st 96, your vehicle was seen outside the Flag Public House. Is that a public house that you frequent on a regular basis? On the 7th of the 1st 96, we understand that there was a burglary that was committed at Meadow Cottage, London Road, Clacton, a property that we already know is yours and that you in fact reported the burglary, I believe, on the 9th of the 1st 96. Do you have any ideas of who may have committed the burglary? Have you any idea to whether it's connected in any way to any allegations that have been put to you? Mr. Steele, I can see no relevance between a burglary at your property and a drug consignment at the present time. I'd advise you not to answer that question. On the 25th of the 1st 96, Mr. Steele, you were seen at the premises known as AJ's Restaurant, which is located on the A12 on the Ipswich Road at Dedham. Whilst you were inside that premises, you were seen to be with another male, and whilst you were there, you took a telephone call from Peter. During the course of the conversation, you allegedly said that you would pick it up and that you'd be home in 30 minutes. You then left the premises, the second man then driving off in a motor vehicle. Can you recall that particular meeting in AJ's Restaurant? On the 1st of the 3rd 96, our inquiries show us that yourself, a man by the name of David Gwennett, who we believe to be Paul Gwennett, which is a name which I'm not sure whether was mentioned to you in previous interviews. Certainly your solicitor is aware of that name. I can confirm I am, thank you. And a man by the name of Jack Williams, who we've heard mentioned on a number of occasions, returned to the United Kingdom on a ferry from Holland via Felixstowe that you collected in a motor vehicle. Can you tell me what your relationship is with a man by the name of Paul Gwennett, who I have to say is also in custody in relation to this incident? I've asked you specifically in relation to this alleged importation that occurred between the 25th of the 3rd 96 and the 16th of the 4th. The conspiracy side of it. Featured in that alleged conspiracy is Russell Tate, who we already know is the brother of Patrick Tate, the man who we say was murdered by you and Jack Williams on the 6th of the 12th 95. Russell Tate owns a Mercedes, a black Mercedes motor vehicle, and on the 26th of the 3rd 96 at 8:40 in the morning, Russell Tate was seen at the mobile services at Boreham Interchange putting petrol into the motor vehicle. At 9:02 on the same morning, Russell Tate was seen to leave the McDonald's restaurant at Boreham Interchange and was having a conversation with you, Mr. Steele, before he left. That's the 26th of the 3rd. What was that conversation about? What was that meeting about? As he drives off, that is Russell Tate from the McDonald's, a Granada motor vehicle pulls up and a man by the name of Craig Androlakis gets into the Mercedes with Russell Tate. Now there's a name that we haven't heard mentioned before, and I have to tell you that Androlakis is also in custody in relation to these matters. Could you tell me what your relationship is with Craig Androlakis? How do you know him? Can I ask a question? Sorry, very sorry. I'm just slightly behind on what you were saying. As Russell Tate drove off, a Granada pulled up, is that right? And then the person that Androlakis He got into whose vehicle, please? Tate's. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you. No problem. It needs some clarity because the way that's come out is the fact that the motor's moved off and he's got into it after it's moved off, which obviously can't be correct. Well, it moved off the drive area, then stopped. Androulakis then got in and drove away. I'm not trying to infer that anybody went into the vehicle as it was moving away. No, but you, at 19:33, that same morning, the 26th of the 3rd, the Mercedes containing Russell Tate and Androulakis arrived at the Watermill Public House in Basildon. Androulakis is seen sitting on a beach outside the Windmill Public House, and at the same time, Russell Tate and another person by the name of James arrive, and they go into the Watermill Public House. Subsequently, a few minutes later, Russell Tate, Androulakis and a man by the name of James goes to the boot of the Mercedes, and there is an exchange that takes place. Other people are then involved, and white packets were exchanged, and the vehicles subsequently leave the Watermill Public House. This is important because at 10:40 that morning, the vehicles are stopped on the A13 at Lakeside, and it is found that Russell Tate was in possession of £21,000 worth of Bank of England used notes and about £750 in Spanish pesetas. Another person was found to be in possession of £1,000. A further £20,000 was found on the floor of the Mercedes. A further £8,800 was in Tate's suitcase in the Mercedes, and a sum of £1,000 was on the door of the Rover. We obviously say to you that these people were conveying money to the continent on behalf of yourself and others. Were you aware of that incident on the 26th of the 3rd, 96, Mr. Steele? Who was driving the Rover? I only heard one mention of a Rover right at the end. Or was it just, I can't confirm that. Can't confirm that. Okay, thanks. All these people were arrested and spent some time in police custody, but they were eventually all released without charge. And then on the 27th of the 3rd, the very next day, our inquiries show that Russell Tate, Androulakis and some of the others left the UK via Dover in the black Mercedes and also the Rover motor vehicle from the day before. This, we say, is the start of the background into pursuing the drugs on the continent, and we say, Mr. Steele, that you have full knowledge of what was going on. We find that our inquiries show that Russell Tate spent a little time in France, then he moved on to Spain, to Gibraltar, back to Spain, back to France, onto Belgium, and in that period of time then takes us up to the period of around about the 13th of the 4th, 96, when you booked a lunchtime meal at the Harbour Lights restaurant Tishmas Marina at Walton. Can you tell me on the 13th of the 4th, 96, who you went to lunch with at the Tishmas Marina? At about 1300 hours on the 14th of the 4th, 96, your blue Toyota was seen to arrive at the premises of GT Commercials at Barham. We say that this is the time for the preparation of a run to the continent to collect the drugs involved in this particular importation. Did you travel to GT Commercials Barham at 1 o'clock on the 14th of the 4th, Mr. Steele? If you did, why did you go there? If you didn't go there, would you like to tell us? At about 1400 hours on the 14th of the 4th, the rib boat that we've described being used in this previous importation is seen to be removed from the workshop at GT Commercials and hitched onto the motor vehicle, Blue Transit van, which I think we've mentioned before in previous interviews. That vehicle is seen to pull off towing the trailer Jack Worms is driving, and there's another person in the vehicle. Was that person you, Mr. Steele, in the vehicle on that occasion with Jack Worms? The vehicle is then seen at the Tesco's petrol station on the A14 at Copdock, where Jack Worms fills up the rib with £150 of petrol. Shortly afterwards, at 2:45 on the 14th of the 4th, the rib goes into the entrance at Leventon Marina being towed, and that short while later, towing the empty trailer dripping water leaves the marina. Obviously, you don't have to be an expert to say that the rib, we say, was placed in the water at that time. If you were the other man that was in that vehicle at the marina, did you drive the rib boat out of the marina and head out to sea? Is there any information that you can give us as to the activities on that day? And could you tell us who else may have had access to the use of your rib boat? At about 9:45 in the morning of the 14th of the 4th, the man, Angela Cass, was seen at Dover in a motor vehicle returning from Calais. A check of that vehicle showed that there was a set of fisherman's waders boots and there was a map of the Benelux countries. There was a hire agreement for the car in the name of Darren Nichols, and that a check of the car shows traces of salt water and sand. Was that perhaps the vehicle that was used to transport the consignment of any drugs down to a beach area where it was laid up, we say, for you to collect? There was a number of phone calls throughout the 14th of the 4th, 96, Mr. Steele, between all of the main parties in this conspiracy. I don't intend at this stage to go through them because it's going to take an awfully long time. But suffice to say, there was numerous phone calls that were made. I've asked you in previous interviews whether you could help me as to your recollection of any calls made to the other people that we've heard mentioned during the course of these interviews. What your contact is with them, the reason why you phone them, whether you operate any legitimate sort of business with them, and again, I will ask you the same questions in relation to this particular matter. At 22:45 hours on the 14th of the 4th, the rib boat is seen at Brighton-on-Sea, hard placed on a trailer. The trailer still displaying the index number. The trailer on this occasion is being towed by a blue Range Rover, which we understand is a vehicle that Mr. Williams has access to. 3 male persons were seen present, 2 of whom were wearing what's described as wet weather gear. Are you one of these men near the rib boat on that occasion? We obviously say that on that occasion we believe a consignment of controlled drugs is brought into the country. Would you like to tell us now your involvement in that particular matter? Would you like to give us a location of any drugs to your knowledge that were brought into this country as a result of that particular importation? On the 15th of the 4th, 96 at 18:32 hours, you were seen in a little chef on the A12 at Riverhall on the Colchester-bound carriageway. Shortly afterwards, there was a Granada motor vehicle which was driven by Peter Corey driving away from that location. There was also a Sierra motor vehicle seen to leave that location as well. For the benefit of the tape, I'd just like to say that I sat very close to you in the little chef at the A112 at Colchester that day, and that you are the man that I saw in company with Russell Tate and a third man sitting on a bench at the end of the restaurant, and that about 18:56 hours you left the little chef, you and Russell Tate got into the Hilux in the car park. After a short while, Russell Tate got out of the vehicle and he walked away, and then you drove off on the A112 Colchester bound. Can you tell me now what the purposes of that meeting was between you and Russell Tate? That meeting, we say, the day after that consignment of controlled, we say, was brought into the country. That forms the substance of the allegation concerning the alleged conspiracy to import controlled drugs between the 25th of the 3rd, 96 and the 16th of the 4th, 96. And obviously, I'd just like to point out to you, Mr. Steele, that the events of that day follow very closely the events of the importation that occurred this previous weekend just gone. The rib goes into the water, comes back, drugs are taken onto the shore, and a team of people who we say obviously is masterminded by you is involved then in the collection and distribution of the same. Leaving that matter to one side because you've obviously not going to make any comment to me about that, we'd just like to ask you in relation to the shotgun that was found at Meadow Cottage during the search which we mentioned to you in a previous interview. I just wonder whether you could confirm for the benefit of the tape as to whether you hold any sort of firearms license, shotgun license, and to whether there is any legitimate explanation that you could give to me as to why you should be in possession of that weapon, which of course is a prohibited weapon under the Firearms Act. Is there any information that you can give to me as to how that particular weapon ended up in your loft under the floorboards? If the gun doesn't belong to you, could you tell me who it does belong to? If it was the case that you were looking after the weapon for somebody, would you just like to tell me who that person was and what the circumstances were of that weapon actually being in your premises? We understand from Darren Nichols that you had a bonfire around your house at Meadow Cottage. Could you please tell me what the circumstances were with regard to who you invited to that bonfire night? Did you dispose of any items concerned with the murder, whether it be clothing, weapons, in order to invade any forensic evidence that may connect you with the murders. On the 18th of the 4th, 96, Darren Nichols tells us that he was working near to Gallows Corner, Romford, when he had a meeting with you and that you gave him a kilo of cannabis, which consisted of 4 soap bars. When you handed that cannabis to Darren Nichols, were you in company of Paul Gwinnett? Could you tell me the purposes as to why you gave that drug to Darren Nichols at that time? Were you actually involved in that particular exchange of controlled drugs, Mr. Steele? Darren Nichols has also told me that a month before the murders, or about a month before the murders of Pat Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe, that you asked or told Darren Nichols that you wanted to purchase a shotgun. Darren Nichols tells us that he contacted somebody that he knows, and sometime later, in fact, it was following the deaths of Tate, Tucker and Rolfe that Darren Nichols obtained a shotgun on your behalf. He says that he phoned you in a bit of a state of panic because he didn't know what to do with it in regard to the weapon that had been provided to him. And he says that you told him to the words to the effect, "We'll buy it because we don't want to arouse any suspicion." Darren Nichols tells us that he purchased the shotgun on your behalf for the sum of £350 and that he then handed the shotgun to you. It was a pump-action shotgun, he says, contained in a brown case. Did that particular transaction occur, Mr. Steele? Did you ask Darren Nichols to purchase a shotgun on your behalf? And in fact, a shotgun that he refers to is the same shotgun that was evidently recovered from Meadow Cottage. I intend to conclude the interview fairly shortly now. You've maintained your right to silence throughout the interview, obviously based upon your own feelings and the advice from your solicitor. Before we conclude the interview, just want to ask you one final time, now that you've had time to consider all the matters that have been put to you, as to whether you would like to make any comment to us about the matters that we've discussed. I would also like to put it to you for the final time that on the 16th of the 12th, Mr. Steele, it is alleged that you were involved in the murders of Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe. Were you involved in those murders, Mr. Steele? Did you shoot them in the company with Jack Wombs? Have you ever, Mr. Steele, been involved in any conspiracies to import any controlled drugs from the continent into this country? A shotgun, pump-action shotgun, has been found at your premises at Meadow Cottage. Why do you have that gun in your possession? Who does it belong to? Does it not belong to you? Okay, I intend to therefore conclude the interview. It is still Friday the 17th of the 5th, 96, and the time by my watch now is 21:44 hours.